Hello and welcome to the very Audible Stories. In today's videos, it would be a stories about a hidden kindness coming from a mafia bosses whom everyone feared. If you like these videos, please share your thoughts on the comment sections and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about new videos. Thank you.
The marriage contract that changed everything. Clara Hale never imagined that fixing her family's mistakes would cost her everything: her freedom, her future, and her name. When a forged contract surfaces with her signature on it, she finds herself standing at an altar across from the most dangerous man in the city, Dominic Rinaldi, a mafia boss who doesn't forgive and never forgets. But this isn't a love story. This is a calculated move in a game she didn't know she was playing. As the ring slides onto her finger, Clara realizes the truth. She isn't the bride. She's the bait. If you want to see how Clara survives in a world built on betrayal and blood, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Clara Hale had learned early in life that being useful meant being invisible. In the Hale household, that was the safest way to exist. She moved through the marble hallways of her father's estate like a ghost, carrying ledgers under her arm, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun that made her easy to overlook. That was exactly how she liked it. While her stepsister Vanessa drew attention with designer clothes and carefully crafted tantrums, Clara kept the household accounts balanced, managed the staff schedules, and made sure the quarterly tax filings were submitted on time. Richard Hale barely noticed her. His second wife, Lorraine, pretended she didn't exist. And Vanessa, beautiful, spoiled Vanessa, treated Clara like hired help. It was a small life, a quiet life. But it was predictable, and predictability meant safety. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning in late September. Clara was in the study, cross-referencing shipping invoices against the warehouse inventory logs, when her father's office door slammed open hard enough to rattle the frame. She looked up from her spreadsheet to see Richard Hale stumbling into the hallway, his face the color of old paper. "Where is she?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Where the hell is Vanessa?" Lorraine appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a silk robe, her expression more annoyed than concerned. "She's at the spa. Why are you screaming?" "Get her back here. Now." Richard's hands were shaking as he gripped a stack of papers. "We have a serious problem." Clara set down her pen slowly. Her father rarely raised his voice. Richard Hale was a businessman who prided himself on control, on maintaining composure even when deals went south. Seeing him like this, wild-eyed and panicking, sent a cold thread of unease down her spine. "What kind of problem?" Lorraine descended the stairs with practiced grace, but Clara caught the flash of worry in her eyes. Richard didn't answer. He just thrust the papers at his wife and sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. Lorraine read in silence. With each line, her face grew paler. "This can't be real." "It's real," Richard said hoarsely. "I verified it myself. The contract is legitimate. The signatures, the dates, the terms, it's all legally binding." "What contract?" Clara stood up, her heart beginning to pound. Neither of them looked at her. "We need a lawyer," Lorraine said sharply. "We need to fight this." "There's no time." Richard lifted his head, and Clara saw something she'd never seen in her father's eyes before. Genuine fear. "They're coming here tonight. If we don't comply, if we try to run or hide, they'll take everything. The company, the house, the accounts. They'll destroy us." "Then we give them what they want," Lorraine said coldly. "We give them Vanessa." Clara's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" Finally, her father looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment, Clara knew with horrible certainty that her quiet, invisible life was about to end. "The Marchetti deal," Richard said, his voice hollow. 6 months ago, I needed capital to save the European expansion. Lorenzo Marchetti offered a loan, generous terms, minimal interest. I thought it was legitimate business. It wasn't, Clara said quietly. She'd reviewed those contracts. She remembered thinking the terms were too good, that something felt off. But she'd been dismissed when she'd mentioned it. "Just file it, Clara. Stop asking questions." "Lorenzo Marchetti was a front," Richard continued. The real money came from the Rinaldi family. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Everyone in the city knew the Rinaldi name. Dominic Rinaldi ran the most powerful crime syndicate on the East Coast. Construction, shipping, imports that nobody looked at too closely. Politicians took his calls. Judges ruled in his favor. And people who crossed him disappeared. "You borrowed from the mob," Clara whispered. "I didn't know." Richard slammed his fist on the arm of the chair. The paperwork was clean. Marchetti seemed legitimate. How was I supposed to know he was just a middleman? "The collateral," Lorraine said, still staring at the contract. "The agreement says that if the loan defaults, the Rinaldi family can claim collateral of equivalent value." Richard nodded miserably. "The expansion failed. The European markets tanked, and I couldn't make the payments. I thought I could negotiate, restructure the debt. But then Marchetti died." "Died how?" Clara asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Car accident. Very convenient timing." Richard's laugh was bitter. 2 weeks later, I get contacted by Dominic Rinaldi himself. He tells me the loan has been called in full, $2 million, due immediately. Clara's mind raced through the family finances. They didn't have $2 million liquid. The company assets were leveraged, the real estate was mortgaged, and her father's investment portfolio was mostly tied up in long-term holdings. "The collateral clause," Lorraine said slowly. "It specifies equivalent value. What does that mean?" Richard met his wife's eyes, and Clara saw something pass between them, something that made her stomach drop. "The contract names Vanessa Hale as acceptable collateral in lieu of cash payment," Richard said, each word falling like a stone. "A marriage contract. She becomes Dominic Rinaldi's wife, and the debt is forgiven." The silence that followed was suffocating. "No." Lorraine's voice was flat, absolute. "Absolutely not. Vanessa is 23 years old. She has her whole life ahead of her. She's supposed to marry Senator Morrison's son next spring. I will not let you trade my daughter to some criminal like she's property." "I don't have a choice," Richard shouted. "If I don't deliver on the contract, Rinaldi will take everything. We'll lose the company, the house. We'll be bankrupt and homeless. Or worse. These aren't people who accept excuses, Lorraine. These are people who make examples. Then we run. We liquidate what we can and disappear. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? Rinaldi's reach extends across 3 countries. We can't hide from him." Clara stood frozen, watching her family fall apart. Part of her felt vindicated, years of being ignored, dismissed, treated like she didn't matter, and now her father's arrogance and her stepmother's social climbing had led them straight into a trap. But another part of her felt the walls closing in, because she knew what came next. She'd seen it before, in smaller ways. When something broke, when someone needed to take the blame, when a sacrifice was required, it was always Clara, the invisible daughter, the one nobody would miss. "There has to be another way," Lorraine was saying, her composure cracking. "We could go to the police." "And tell them what? That I borrowed money from criminals and can't pay it back? I'd be arrested for criminal conspiracy, and Rinaldi owns half the police force anyway." "What about the contract itself? If it was signed under false pretenses, the contract is legitimate," a new voice said from the doorway. Clara turned to see a man in an expensive suit standing in the entrance to the study. He was maybe 40, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of calm, professional demeanor that came from years of practice. Behind him stood 2 men built like concrete walls. "Who the hell are you?" Richard demanded, lurching to his feet. "Marcus Volterra. I represent the Rinaldi family's legal interests." The man stepped into the room without invitation, his bodyguards flanking him. "I'm here to facilitate the contract fulfillment." You can't just walk into my house." "The contract gives us certain rights of access," Marcus said smoothly, pulling out a tablet. "I'm here to collect Miss Vanessa Hale and escort her to the Rinaldi estate, where the marriage ceremony will take place tonight at 8 o'clock. "Tonight?" Lorraine's voice pitched upward. "That's impossible. Vanessa isn't even here." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Then I suggest you contact her immediately. Mister, Rinaldi has been very patient, but that patience has limits." "We need time," Richard said desperately. "A few days to prepare?" "The contract specifies that fulfillment must occur within 24 hours of official notification. You were notified at 9 o'clock this morning. That gives us, Marcus checked his watch, approximately 9 hours. Clara watched her father deflate. Lorraine clutched the papers like they might offer some escape route if she just read them carefully enough. And Marcus Volterra stood in their home like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. "I'll call Vanessa," Lorraine said finally, her voice thick. "But she'll need time to process this. You can't expect—" "I expect compliance with the contract," Marcus said. "The ceremony is scheduled for 8 o'clock. If Miss Vanessa Hale is not present, Mr. Rinaldi will consider the contract breached. The consequences of breach are detailed in Section 12, Paragraph 4. I don't recommend testing his resolve." He gestured to one of his bodyguards, who produced a thick manila envelope. "These are the ceremony details, the prenuptial agreements, and the transfer documents. Everything is prepared. All we need is the bride." Marcus set the envelope on Richard's desk with the finality of a judge's gavel. Then he looked directly at Clara for the first time, and something flickered in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or calculation. "I'll return at 7 o'clock, he said. "Please ensure Miss Hale is ready." The three men left as smoothly as they'd arrived, and the house fell into stunned silence. Lorraine moved first, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Vanessa. She needs to come home right now." Clara sat down slowly, her mind spinning. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People didn't get forced into marriages in the 21st century, not in America, not in cities with laws and courts, but they did. When enough money was involved, when enough power was at stake, when the people making the rules were the same people breaking them. "Clara." She looked up to find her father standing over her, and the expression on his face made her want to run. "Don't," she said quietly. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." Clara stood up, backing away. "You're going to ask me to do something, and I'm telling you right now the answer is no." "Vanessa can't do this," Richard said, desperation bleeding into every word. "She's fragile. She's not equipped to handle someone like Dominic Rinaldi. It would destroy her. So you want it to destroy me instead. You're stronger. You've always been stronger." Richard reached for her, but Clara stepped back. "You handle difficult situations. You solve problems. You're smart. You're capable. I'm disposable," Clara finished bitterly. "That's what you mean. Vanessa is precious and delicate, but I'm just practical, invisible Clara who fixes things. So why not fix this too?" "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," Clara's voice cracked. "You made a deal with criminals, you put Vanessa's name on a contract without telling anyone, and now you want me to clean up your mess by marrying a mob boss." "It's not forever," Lorraine cut in, her phone pressed to her ear as she waited for Vanessa to answer. "These marriages, they're business arrangements. You'd live in his house, attend his events, but it would be in name only. And once the contract period ends—" "What contract period?" Clara snatched the papers from the desk, scanning the dense legal language. Her heart sank with every line. "There is no end date. This is a permanent marriage contract." "Everything is negotiable," Richard said quickly. "Once you're inside, once you have access to Rinaldi, you could find leverage, something to—" "To what? Blackmail my way out of a forced marriage to a man who kills people for a living?" Clara's hands were shaking now, anger and fear mixing into something combustive. "Do you hear yourself? Do you have any idea what you're asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to save this family," Richard said, and for the first time Clara heard genuine emotion in his voice. Not love. He'd never offered her that, but something close to it. Desperation, maybe. Or guilt. "Everything I've built, everything we have, it all disappears if we don't comply. And Vanessa," his voice broke, "Vanessa wouldn't survive in that world, but you could. You're smart enough, tough enough. You could figure out a way to protect yourself." Clara stared at the man who'd raised her, barely, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. She'd spent years trying to earn his approval, his attention, his acknowledgement. She'd made herself useful, indispensable, hoping that someday he'd see her as more than just the daughter from his first marriage, the one who reminded him of the wife who'd died. But he'd never seen her as anything except a tool, a means to an end. And now, when it mattered most, he was asking her to sacrifice herself for a stepsister who'd never shown her a moment of kindness in a family that had never made her feel like she belonged. The worst part was, she was actually considering it. Not because she wanted to save Richard or Lorraine or spoiled, selfish Vanessa, but because the alternative, watching them lose everything, becoming homeless and hunted, felt like a weight she'd carry forever. Because despite everything, despite years of neglect and dismissal, she still wanted to be the person who fixed things, the person who held the broken pieces together. "She's not answering," Lorraine said, her voice tight with panic. "I've called 6 times. She's probably in a treatment room with her phone turned off." "Keep trying," Richard ordered. Then he turned back to Clara, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was already making the decision for her. "If Vanessa doesn't answer in the next hour, we don't have a choice. You'll have to take her place." "I haven't agreed to anything." "Clara, please." Richard's voice dropped, becoming almost gentle. "I know I haven't been the father you deserved. I know I've let you down in more ways than I can count. But I'm asking you now, begging you, to help us. Just this once." Just this once. As if she hadn't spent her entire life helping them, fixing their mistakes, managing their chaos. As if this was some small favor instead of signing away her entire future to a man whose name was synonymous with violence. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. If she said no, if she walked away, what would happen? Her father would lose everything. They'd be ruined, maybe worse. And Vanessa, spoiled, cruel Vanessa, would be dragged kicking and screaming into a world she had no tools to navigate. But if Clara said yes, if she took Vanessa's place, she didn't let herself finish that thought. "I need to see the full contract," she said finally, her voice distant and cold. "Everything, all the clauses, all the terms. I want to know exactly what I'm agreeing to." Relief flooded Richard's face. "Of course, anything you need. And I want it in writing that if I do this, you clear my mother's medical debts." Clara met her father's eyes steadily. "The hospital bills you never paid, the funeral costs you said you'd handle, all of it, paid in full." Richard flinched, but he nodded. "Done." "And one more thing." Clara's voice was steady now, carved from ice. "After tonight, I don't want to hear from any of you unless it's absolutely necessary. No calls asking for help, no requests to fix your problems, no pretending we're a family. You want me to do this? Fine. But when it's over, I'm done with all of you." Lorraine looked like she might protest, but Richard just nodded again, deflating. "Agreed." Clara took the manila envelope and walked out of the study, her footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. She climbed the stairs to her small bedroom, the one at the end of the hall, away from the master suite and Vanessa's sprawling quarters, and locked the door behind her. Then finally she let herself shake. She sank onto the edge of her bed and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were contracts, agreements, ceremony details, all laid out with ruthless efficiency. The marriage would be legally binding in every way. There was no provision for divorce, no escape clause, no expiration date. Buried in the middle of the stack was a photograph. Clara pulled it out and found herself looking at Dominic Rinaldi for the first time. He was younger than she expected, maybe 35 with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than her car, and he stood with the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing you were the most dangerous person in any room. But it was his expression that caught Clara's attention. He wasn't smiling. He looked calculating, patient, like a chess player studying the board 3 moves ahead. This was the man she was supposed to marry in, she checked her watch, 7 hours. A knock at the door made her jump. "Clara?" Lorraine's voice was muffled. Vanessa finally answered. "She's on her way home." Clara didn't respond. She just stared at the photograph, memorizing the face of the stranger who was about to become her husband. 30 minutes later, the house erupted in screaming. Clara emerged from her room to find Vanessa in the foyer, her face streaked with makeup and fury. "I will not do this. I don't care what some stupid contract says. You cannot make me marry some criminal." "Vanessa, please, just listen." Lorraine tried to put a hand on her daughter's arm, but Vanessa jerked away. "No, I'm supposed to marry David Morrison. We have plans. We have a future." Vanessa's voice pitched into hysteria. "You're asking me to throw away everything for some business deal Dad made with the mob? That's insane." "It's not negotiable," Richard said, his voice hard. "The contract is binding. Then break it. Hire lawyers, pay them off. I don't care. Just fix this. We can't. Richard looked older than Clara had ever seen him, worn down by fear and failure. There's no way out. Either you comply or we lose everything. Vanessa's eyes, wild and red-rimmed, landed on Clara standing at the top of the stairs. This is your fault, she spat. You do the bookkeeping, you review the contracts. You should have caught this. Clara felt something cold and final settle in her chest. I did catch it. I told Dad the Marchetti terms looked suspicious. He told me to stop asking questions. You should have pushed harder. I should have what, Vanessa? Forced him to listen? I'm not the one who makes decisions in this family. I just clean up the messes afterward. Well, you can clean up this one. Vanessa stormed toward the stairs, her face twisted with rage and fear. You want to be so useful? You want Dad to finally notice you? Fine, take my place. Marry the monster. Because I sure as hell won't. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Clara looked at her stepsister, beautiful, spoiled, cruel, and felt something shift inside her. All those years of being invisible, of being the responsible one, the one who fixed things while Vanessa took and never gave anything back. Okay, Clara said quietly. The foyer went silent. What? Vanessa's expression flickered with confusion. I'll do it. Clara descended the stairs slowly, her decision crystallizing with each step. I'll take your place. I'll marry Dominic Rinaldi. Clara, you don't have to. Richard started, but the relief in his voice was unmistakable. Yes, I do. Clara reached the bottom of the stairs and looked her father in the eye. Because if I don't, you'll all fall apart, and despite everything, I can't watch that happen. Vanessa's face transformed, relief and triumph mixing into something ugly. Perfect. That's perfect. You were always better at dealing with difficult people anyway. Clara turned to her stepsister and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You're right. I am better at dealing with difficult people, which means I'm probably better suited to survive whatever comes next. Something in Clara's tone made Vanessa's smile falter, but before she could respond, the doorbell rang. 7 o'clock. Marcus Volterra had returned. Richard opened the door with shaking hands. We've made a decision, he said, his voice hoarse. My daughter has agreed to fulfill the contract. Marcus stepped inside, his expression professionally neutral. Excellent. Miss Vanessa, if you'll come with me, Not Vanessa, Clara interrupted, stepping forward. Me, Clara Hale. I'm taking her place. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. He pulled out his tablet, scrolling through documents. The contract specifically names Vanessa Hale as collateral. The contract names a daughter of Richard Hale, Clara said, repeating the language she'd memorized from the papers upstairs. I'm his daughter, legally and biologically. I fulfill the terms. Marcus studied her for a long moment, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. Finally, he nodded. I'll need to verify this with Mr. Rinaldi. He stepped aside, pulling out his phone. Clara watched him speak in low tones, catching fragments of the conversation. Substitution. Legally valid. Yes, sir. When Marcus returned, his expression was unreadable. Mr. Rinaldi has agreed to the substitution, provided Miss Clara Hale signs an additional acknowledgement confirming she is entering the marriage of her own free will. Clara's laugh was bitter. Free will, right. It's a legal formality, Marcus said, producing another document. Please read and sign. Clara skimmed the paper. It was exactly what she expected. A statement absolving the Rinaldi family of any claims of coercion or force. She signed it with a steady hand, watching her own signature seal her fate. We have 2 hours, Marcus said, checking his watch. I'll need Miss Hale to come with us now to prepare for the ceremony. Now? Lorraine's voice cracked. She needs time to pack, to prepare. Everything she needs will be provided at the estate. Marcus gestured to his bodyguards. Miss Hale? Clara looked back at her family one last time. Richard couldn't meet her eyes. Lorraine looked torn between relief and guilt. And Vanessa. Vanessa was already turning away, probably planning her engagement announcement to David Morrison, now that the threat to her perfect life had been eliminated. Goodbye, Clara said to none of them in particular. She walked past Marcus Volterra and his guards, out the front door of the house she'd lived in for 15 years, and climbed into the black SUV waiting at the curb. As they pulled away, Clara didn't look back. The drive to the Rinaldi estate took 40 minutes, winding through the city and out into the countryside where old money built its fortresses. Clara spent the time staring out the window, watching her old life disappear behind her and trying not to think about what waited ahead. The estate appeared at the end of a tree-lined drive, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from an Italian villa. Marble columns, terraced gardens, fountains that probably cost more than her father's house. Clara had seen wealth before, but this was different. This was power made visible. Marcus led her through a side entrance, bypassing the main areas where staff were clearly preparing for some kind of event. They climbed a staircase to the second floor, where he opened a door to a suite of rooms that could have housed her family's entire house. "You have 90 minutes," Marcus said. "The stylist team is already here. They'll help you prepare." "Prepare for what exactly?" Clara asked. "A ceremony, a performance, or a funeral?" Marcus's expression softened fractionally. "For whatever comes next, Miss Hale, I suggest you use the time wisely." He left her alone with three women who introduced themselves as hair, makeup, and wardrobe specialists. They worked with efficient precision, transforming Clara from invisible daughter to Mafia bride in under an hour. The dress they brought was simpler than she expected, white silk that draped elegantly without excessive flourishes. No veil, no train, nothing that screamed traditional wedding. This wasn't about romance or celebration, this was about contract fulfillment. Clara stared at herself in the mirror when they finished. The woman looking back was polished, elegant, and completely unfamiliar. They'd left her hair down in soft waves, applied makeup that made her eyes look larger and more dramatic than usual, and dressed her in a gown that whispered money and taste. She looked like she belonged in this world, which was terrifying because she absolutely didn't. A knock at the door announced Marcus's return. "It's time." Clara followed him down a different staircase, through halls decorated with art that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. They entered a library, dark wood, leather-bound books, a massive fireplace where a small group waited. Dominic Rinaldi stood by the window. He was taller than his photograph suggested, and somehow more imposing despite wearing what appeared to be the same expression he'd had in the picture. Calm, calculating, patient. His dark suit fit perfectly, emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean frame. He turned when Clara entered, and his eyes, dark brown, almost black, swept over her with the same clinical assessment someone might give a piece of property. "Miss Hale," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly smooth. "Thank you for being punctual." "Thank you for being punctual," as if she'd shown up for a business meeting instead of a forced marriage. "I didn't have much choice," Clara replied, pleased when her voice came out steady. Something flickered in Dominic's expression. Amusement, maybe, or surprise. "I appreciate honesty. It's a rare quality." "Then let me be honest," Clara said, her fear transforming into reckless courage. "I don't want to be here. This marriage is coercion dressed up in legal language. So let's skip the pretense that this is anything other than what it is, a transaction." The room went silent. Marcus looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The other people present, a priest, a lawyer, and two men who were clearly Dominic's associates, stared at Clara like she'd just signed her own death warrant. But Dominic Rinaldi smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives its prey right before striking. "A transaction," he repeated. "Yes, Miss Hale, that's exactly what this is. And I'm pleased to see you understand the terms." He crossed the room with measured steps, stopping directly in front of her. This close, Clara could see the fine details. The slight scar above his left eyebrow, the precise cut of his suit, the cold intelligence in his eyes. "You're not Vanessa," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You're the one who does the bookkeeping, the one who actually knows what's happening in your father's business." Clara's heart stuttered. He knew. He'd known all along that Richard had multiple daughters, and he'd known exactly which one had the information he needed. "The contract didn't specify which daughter," she whispered, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. "You never intended to marry Vanessa, did you?" Dominic's smile widened fractionally. "Vanessa is beautiful, useless, and predictable. You, Miss Hale, are something far more valuable. You're intelligent, observant, and you have access to all of your father's records." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was a setup. You manipulated the contract to force my family to offer me as collateral. I provided an option, Dominic corrected. Your family chose to exercise it, but yes, I was hoping they'd be smart enough to send you instead of your stepsister. Why? Clara demanded, anger overriding caution. What do you want from me? Dominic leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I want you to help me find a traitor, Miss Hale. Someone in my organization has been stealing from me, undermining my operations, and using your father's business connections to hide the evidence. I need someone I can trust to go through records, find patterns, identify the weak points. Someone smart enough to see what others miss. And you think that's me? I know it is. Dominic straightened, his expression returning to neutral. Your father may have overlooked your abilities, but I don't make that mistake. You're going to help me root out whoever is bleeding my empire from the inside. And in exchange, I'll make sure your family doesn't end up in pieces. Clara stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't just a forced marriage. This was recruitment. Dominic Rinaldi had engineered this entire situation to acquire an analyst, someone he could control through leverage and fear. She was bait, just like she'd suspected, but she was also being handed tools, access, information, resources. If she was smart, if she was careful, maybe she could find a way to use those tools for herself. And if I refuse to help you, she asked, then this marriage becomes considerably more unpleasant for everyone involved. Dominic's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing weather patterns. But I don't think you'll refuse, Miss Hale. You're too pragmatic for that. You understand cost-benefit analysis, and right now cooperation offers significantly better returns than resistance. He was right, and they both knew it. Clara had walked into this trap the moment she'd agreed to take Vanessa's place. Now the only question was whether she could survive long enough to find a way out. Shall we begin? Dominic gestured to the priest waiting by the fireplace. We have a contract to fulfill. The ceremony was brief, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion. Clara spoke her vows in a steady voice, watching Dominic's face for any hint of what he was thinking. He gave nothing away, reciting his own promises with the same calm precision he might use to order lunch. When the priest pronounced them married, Dominic slipped a platinum band onto Clara's finger, heavy, expensive, and completely impersonal. Then he leaned in, and for one horrible moment Clara thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, he whispered directly into her ear, "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Rinaldi. Your real work starts tomorrow." He pulled back, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. Clara signed below him, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her new name, Clara Rinaldi. The lawyer witnessed, Marcus documented, and just like that, Clara Hale ceased to exist. In her place stood Clara Rinaldi, unwilling bride, reluctant spy, and the newest pawn in a game she was only beginning to understand. As the small group dispersed, Dominic took Clara's arm with surprising gentleness. "I'll show you to your rooms," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Then quieter, "We have a great deal to discuss, you and I, about loyalty, about leverage, and about exactly what I expect from this arrangement." Clara let him guide her from the library, acutely aware of the ring on her finger and the trap closing around her. She'd entered this marriage thinking she was saving her family from their mistakes. She was only now beginning to realize she might have walked straight into something far more dangerous than a simple debt collection. Dominic Rinaldi hadn't just bought himself a bride, he'd acquired a weapon. And Clara had no idea whether she was supposed to be the one wielding it or the one being aimed at the target. The rooms Dominic showed her to weren't just rooms, they were a wing. Clara followed him through double doors into a suite that sprawled across what had to be half the mansion's second floor. A sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A bedroom with a four-poster bed that could sleep 5 people comfortably. A bathroom done in marble and gold that looked like it belonged in a palace. "Your things will arrive tomorrow," Dominic said, walking to the windows and closing the curtains with efficient movements. "Marcus will provide you with anything you need in the meantime. Credit cards, phone, vehicle access, all under your new name." Clara stood in the center of the sitting room, feeling unmoored. "Under surveillance, I'm guessing." "Of course." Dominic turned to face her, leaning against the window frame with casual elegance. "You're my wife now, Mrs. Rinaldi. That comes with certain accommodations. and certain restrictions. Spell them out, Clara said. I want to know exactly what cage I'm in. Direct. Dominic's smile returned, sharp-edged. I like that. All right, here are the rules. You have freedom of movement within the estate and the city, but security will accompany you everywhere. You'll attend events with me as needed, charity galas, business dinners, family gatherings. You'll present as a devoted wife in public. And in private? In private, you work. Dominic crossed to a desk in the corner and pulled out a tablet. Starting tomorrow, you'll have access to financial records from my legitimate businesses and the associated shell companies. I need you to find discrepancies, trace money flows, identify weak points in the network. Clara took the tablet he offered, scanning the preliminary documents already loaded. Even at a glance, she could see the complexity. Dozens of companies, hundreds of transactions, patterns buried in layers of legitimate business. This will take weeks. You have time. The person stealing from me has been careful, patient. They've been bleeding the operation slowly for at least 2 years. I need someone equally patient to unravel what they've done. Why me? Clara looked up from the tablet. You have accountants, analysts, people who actually work for you by choice. Why force someone into this position? Dominic moved closer, and Clara had to resist the urge to step back. He had a way of commanding space that made the enormous room feel suddenly smaller. Because everyone who works for me could be the traitor, he said quietly. My accountants, my lawyers, my advisors. Any of them could be compromised. But you? You're an outsider. You have no loyalty to my organization, no connections to my people. That makes you the only person I can trust to be objective. You don't trust me, Clara countered. You're coercing me. Exactly, which means I know your motivations. Fear is simple, clean, predictable. Loyalty can be bought, sold, or broken. But fear? Dominic's eyes glinted. Fear is honest. Clara felt cold spread through her chest. This man had thought through every angle, anticipated every move. She wasn't dealing with a simple criminal. She was dealing with someone who understood human psychology better than most therapists. What happens when I find your traitor? She asked. That depends on who it is. Dominic took the tablet back, setting it on the desk. But that's not your concern. Your job is to identify the problem. I'll handle the solution. The way he said solution made Clara's stomach turn. You mean you'll kill them? I mean I'll handle it, Dominic repeated, his tone allowing no argument. You're here to analyze, not to question my methods. Is that clear? Clara met his gaze and saw nothing but cold certainty. This was a man who made decisions and didn't lose sleep over them. A man who saw problems as things to be eliminated, not solved. Crystal clear, she said. Good. Dominic walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing. There's a family dinner tomorrow night. My mother, my siblings, key associates. You'll be introduced as my wife. I expect you to be charming, gracious, and utterly unremarkable. Unremarkable, Claire repeated. I thought you married me because I was smart. I married you because you're smart enough to know when to hide it. Dominic opened the door. The people at that dinner will be looking for weakness, for leverage, for any sign that you're more than decorative. Give them nothing. Be pleasant, be forgettable, and let them underestimate you. And if they don't, Dominic's smile was cold, then you'll learn very quickly how my family deals with threats. Sleep well, Mrs. Rinaldi. He left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Clara stood alone in her gilded cage, the weight of the platinum ring on her finger suddenly unbearable. She twisted it absently, staring at the opulent room that was supposed to be hers now. Everything was beautiful, expensive, perfect, and completely foreign. She walked to the bedroom, finding clothes already laid out on the bed. Simple things: pajamas, a robe, basic necessities. Someone had anticipated her needs with disturbing accuracy. Clara changed mechanically, her mind racing through everything Dominic had said. He needed her to find a traitor hidden somewhere in his organization. Someone smart enough to steal for 2 years without being caught. Someone with access to financial records and enough knowledge to hide their tracks. Someone who might very well kill her if they realized she was hunting them. She climbed into the enormous bed, feeling small and alone in the darkness. Through the windows, she could see the estate grounds lit by strategically placed lights, beautiful and prison-like all at once. Clara closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to the same thought. She'd agreed to this. She'd walked into Dominic Rinaldi's trap with her eyes open, thinking she was saving her family. But lying here in the dark, wearing another woman's pajamas in a stranger's house with a ring on her finger that marked her as property, Clara wondered if maybe she'd just saved her family by destroying herself. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sparked something else, something cold and calculating that she'd never let herself feel before. If Dominic Rinaldi thought he could use her as a tool, maybe it was time Clara learned to use him right back. She just had to survive long enough to figure out how. Morning came with a knock at the door and a woman's voice calling, "Mrs. Rinaldi, I'm Maria, your personal assistant. May I come in?" Clara sat up, disoriented for a moment before the events of the previous night came crashing back. The marriage, the threats, the impossible task Dominic had set before her. "Come in," she called, her voice rough with sleep. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and an expression of professional warmth. "Good morning. I hope you slept well. I've brought breakfast and some clothing options for today." She wheeled in a cart laden with food, fresh pastries, fruit, coffee that smelled like heaven. Behind her, two younger women carried garment bags. "Mr. Rinaldi asked me to ensure you have everything you need," Maria continued, setting up the breakfast on a small table by the window. "Your personal belongings are being collected from your father's house and will arrive this afternoon. In the meantime, these should suffice." Clara climbed out of bed, feeling like an actress who'd wandered onto the wrong set. "Thank you, Maria, but I can dress myself." "Of course, Mrs. Rinaldi. I'm here simply to help you navigate your new household. The estate can be overwhelming at first." Maria's smile was kind, but her eyes were sharp. Clara had the distinct impression that this woman reported directly to Dominic. "I appreciate that," Clara said carefully. "Could you tell me where I might find Mr. Rinaldi this morning?" "He's in his office on the ground floor, East Wing, but he's asked that you join him in the library at 10 o'clock. That gives you about an hour to prepare." "An hour to prepare for what, exactly?" Clara wanted to ask, but she kept the question to herself. "Thank you. I can manage from here." Maria nodded, ushering the other women out. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Just pick up any house phone and dial 0. When they left, Clara poured herself coffee and stood at the window, looking out over the grounds. In daylight, the estate was even more impressive. Manicured gardens, a pool, tennis courts, and what looked like a guest house in the distance. Wealth on a scale she'd never experienced. She ate quickly, then examined the clothing Maria had brought. Designer labels, perfect sizes, styles that were elegant without being showy. Someone had done their homework on her. Clara chose a navy dress that was professional without being severe, paired it with low heels, and twisted her hair into a simple knot. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger again, polished, composed, unremarkable. Exactly what Dominic had requested. She found the library at 10 o'clock precisely, following Maria's directions through halls that seemed designed to intimidate. The library itself was 2 stories of books, leather furniture, and dark wood that smelled of old paper and expensive cigars. Dominic sat at a massive desk, reading something on his computer. He looked up when Clara entered, his expression unreadable. "Punctual," he observed. "Good. Sit." Clara sat in the chair across from him, folding her hands in her lap and waiting. She'd learned long ago that silence could be a weapon. Let him fill it. Dominic studied her for a moment, then turned his computer screen so she could see it. "These are the primary accounts you'll be analyzing. Shipping companies, import-export businesses, construction firms, all legitimate on the surface. And underneath?" Clara leaned forward, scanning the spreadsheets. "Underneath, they're how we move money, acquire property, and maintain influence. But someone has been creating false accounts, siphoning funds, and covering their tracks through the legitimate businesses. I need you to find the pattern." Clara's mind immediately started working, seeing the numbers as a puzzle to be solved. "I'll need access to historical data, at least 3 years back, and I'll need to see personnel files, who has authorization to create accounts, who approves transactions. You'll have everything." Dominic pulled out a flash drive. "This contains full access to our financial systems, password protected, encrypted, traceable. If you try to copy or share this information, I'll know immediately. I'm not stupid enough to betray you when you know where my family lives, Clara said flatly. No, you're not. Dominic slid the flash drive across the desk. Which is why I chose you. Intelligence paired with self-preservation, a useful combination. Clara took the drive, feeling its weight in her palm. This was power, in its own way. Information was leverage, and Dominic was handing her access to his entire financial empire. Why are you really doing this? She asked suddenly. You could have hired investigators, forensic accountants, FBI consultants. Why go through the elaborate charade of a forced marriage? Dominic leaned back in his chair, considering her. Because investigators can be bought. Consultants have loyalty to their firms. The FBI answers to other masters. But you? He smiled that cold smile again. You answer only to me. Your survival depends on my goodwill. That makes you the most reliable employee I could possibly have. I'm not your employee. I'm your prisoner. Semantics. Dominic waved a dismissive hand. Call it what you like, Mrs. Rinaldi. The work remains the same. Find my traitor, and you'll find your life here considerably more comfortable. And if I don't find them, then we'll both be disappointed. Dominic's tone suggested disappointment would have consequences Clara didn't want to explore. But I have faith in your abilities. Your father may have overlooked your talents, but I see exactly what you're capable of. The compliment felt like a threat. Clara stood, clutching the flash drive. When do I start? Now. Dominic gestured to a laptop set up on a side table. You'll work here, where I can monitor your progress. I have other business to attend to, but I'll check in periodically. Clara moved to the laptop, plugging in the flash drive and watching as files began to populate the screen. Thousands of documents, millions in transactions, years of data. It would take weeks just to understand the structure, let alone find anomalies. She started with the basics, mapping out the company relationships, identifying the key players, tracking the flow of money through the legitimate businesses. Hours passed in focused silence, broken only by the scratch of her pen on paper as she made notes. Dominic came and went, never speaking, just observing. Clara tried to ignore his presence, but she was always aware of him, the way he moved through the space, the way his attention shifted between his own work and monitoring hers. Around 2 o'clock, Maria appeared with lunch. You should eat, Mrs. Rinaldi. You've been working for 4 hours straight. Had it been that long? Clara looked up from the screen, her eyes burning. She accepted the sandwich Maria offered, eating without really tasting it, her mind still on the patterns she was beginning to see. Find anything? Dominic asked from across the room. Maybe. Clara pulled up a spreadsheet highlighting several entries. These shipping invoices, the amounts don't match the cargo manifests. Someone's recording higher values than what's actually being shipped. Dominic crossed to look over her shoulder. How much higher? 10 to 15% across multiple shipments, small enough to miss in routine audits, but over 2 years? Clara ran quick calculations. Could be several $100,000. Who authorized the invoices? Clara traced the approval chain. Different people, rotating pattern. But they all go through one clearinghouse, a company called Maritime Solutions Group. I know that company. Dominic's voice went cold. It's run by my brother's wife. She handles coordination between our shipping operations and the port authorities. Clara felt the temperature in the room drop. Your brother? Antonio. Dominic straightened, his expression carved from stone. My younger brother, who oversees our maritime operations, and his wife, Sophia, who supposedly manages the administrative side. That doesn't mean, Clara started, but Dominic cut her off. Keep digging. Find everything connected to Maritime Solutions. I want every transaction, every invoice, every email. If Sophia is involved, I need proof before I move. The way he said before I move made Clara's skin crawl. What will you do to her? That depends on what you find. Dominic returned to his desk, his movements tight with barely controlled anger. And whether my brother knew. Clara turned back to the computer, her hands suddenly cold. She'd known this job would lead to consequences, but hearing Dominic talk about his own family with such clinical detachment drove home exactly what kind of world she'd entered. She spent the rest of the afternoon drilling down into Maritime Solutions records. The pattern became clearer with each layer she uncovered: false invoices, inflated values, money disappearing into accounts that led nowhere. It was sophisticated, well hidden, but once Clara knew what to look for, the evidence built rapidly. By the time Maria came to tell her it was time to prepare for dinner, Clara had compiled a damning portfolio of fraud that pointed directly at Sofia Rinaldi. "I'll continue tomorrow," she told Dominic, saving her work and removing the flash drive. "No." Dominic stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "You'll continue after dinner. I want a complete report by midnight. This can't wait." "I need time to verify—" "Midnight, Mrs. Rinaldi." Dominic's tone allowed no argument. "The family dinner starts in an hour. Maria will help you prepare. Be downstairs at 7 sharp." He left without waiting for a response, and Clara sat alone in the library, staring at the laptop that contained enough evidence to destroy someone's life. This was what Dominic had married her to do. Not just find the traitor, but provide the ammunition for whatever retribution he had planned. Clara was building the case that would let Dominic pull the trigger. She thought about refusing, about telling him to find someone else to do his dirty work. But the weight of the ring on her finger reminded her that she didn't have choices anymore. She'd made her deal with the devil. Now she had to see it through. Maria met her at the bedroom door, already holding a different dress. Emerald green silk that looked deceptively simple, but probably cost more than Clara used to make in a month. "For tonight," Maria said, laying it on the bed. "Mrs. Rinaldi, the elder Mrs. Rinaldi, prefers formal dinners. You'll want to make a good impression." "Any advice?" Clara asked, moving to the bathroom to fix her makeup. Maria hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Be respectful to Mrs. Rinaldi. She's the matriarch, and her opinion carries weight. With Antonio and Sofia," she paused. "Just be careful. The family dynamics can be complicated. Complicated how? Antonio believes he should have been made head of the family instead of Dominic. There's resentment there. And Sofia—" Maria's expression tightened. "Sofia is ambitious. She married into this family for power, and she doesn't like anyone who might threaten her position." "And I threaten her position by being Dominic's wife?" "You threaten her by being smart." Maria met Clara's eyes in the mirror. "Sofia is beautiful and connected, but she's not clever. She knows it, and she hates anyone who reminds her of it. So tonight, be charming, but not threatening. Smile, agree, and don't let her see what you're capable of." It was the same advice Dominic had given. Be unremarkable. Be forgettable. Clara was starting to understand that in this world, invisibility wasn't just useful. It was survival. She dressed carefully, applying makeup with a light hand and leaving her hair in soft waves rather than the severe bun she'd worn earlier. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who could blend into any high society gathering without drawing attention. Perfect. Dominic was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase, wearing a different suit, charcoal gray with a dark tie. He looked like old money and new danger combined, and when his eyes swept over Clara, she saw approval flicker across his face. "You'll do," he said, offering his arm. Clara took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. "Any last-minute instructions?" "Smile. Agree with my mother on everything. Deflect personal questions. And if Sofia tries to corner you, stay pleasant but give her nothing to work with." "You make it sound like I'm going into battle." "You are." Dominic led her toward the dining room. "Family dinners are where alliances are tested and weaknesses are exposed. Everyone will be watching you, measuring you, looking for leverage. Don't give them any." They entered a formal dining room that could have hosted a state dinner. Crystal chandeliers, a table that seated 20, and already a dozen people gathered with drinks in hand. Conversation stopped when Clara and Dominic appeared. An elegant woman in her 60s separated from the group, moving toward them with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She had Dominic's dark eyes and the same aura of controlled power, softened slightly by age, and what might have been warmth, or might have been excellent acting. "Mother," Dominic said, kissing her cheek. "This is Clara, my wife. Clara, my mother, Vittoria Rinaldi." Vittoria's gaze swept over Clara with the precision of a jeweler appraising a stone. "Welcome to the family, my dear. Dominic told us so little about you. We were all very surprised by the wedding. It happened quickly," Clara said, keeping her voice warm but not overeager. I'm honored to meet you, Mrs. Rinaldi. Please call me Vittoria. We're family now. She took Clara's hands, her grip surprisingly strong. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. Clara let herself be led into the gauntlet, meeting a parade of names and faces. Antonio, Dominic's brother, was younger, but with the same dark intensity, and eyes that held barely concealed resentment. His wife Sophia was blonde, beautiful, and smiled at Clara with the warmth of a snake eyeing prey. There were others, cousins, associates, trusted advisors, all watching Clara with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. She smiled, made small talk, and channeled every lesson she'd learned from years of being invisible in her father's house. When they finally sat down to dinner, Clara found herself between Dominic and Vittoria, with Sophia directly across the table, the perfect position to be observed from all angles. The meal began with impeccable service and polite conversation. Vittoria asked Clara about her background, her education, how she and Dominic met. Clara had prepared answers, vague enough to be uninteresting, truthful enough to avoid obvious lies. My family is in shipping logistics, Clara said, which was technically true if you counted her father's failed import business. Dominic and I met through business connections. How romantic, Sophia said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Though I must say, it's unusual for Dominic to marry so suddenly. We all thought he'd remain a confirmed bachelor. Plans change, Dominic said smoothly, his hand finding Clara's under the table and squeezing once, a warning or reassurance she couldn't tell which. Indeed they do. Antonio raised his wine glass. To unexpected changes and new family members. Welcome, Clara. The toast was polite, but Clara heard the edge underneath. She smiled and sipped her wine, feeling like she was navigating a minefield where every word could trigger an explosion. Halfway through the main course, Sophia leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. Clara, you must tell us, what attracted you to Dominic? Was it his charm, his success, or simply the fact that he's the most powerful man in the city? The question was designed to trap her. Answer wrong and she'd appear either naive or calculating. Clara set down her fork and met Sophia's gaze directly. I was attracted to his honesty, she said simply. Dominic doesn't pretend to be something he's not. In my experience, that's rarer than power or charm. Vittoria laughed, a genuine sound. Well said. Honesty is indeed a rare commodity. Sophia's smile tightened, but she couldn't push further without appearing rude. Clara had given an answer that was both true and utterly uninformative. Exactly what Dominic had requested. The dinner continued with similar exchanges. Probing questions met with carefully neutral responses. Clara watched the dynamics around the table, seeing the way Antonio deferred to Dominic while his body language screamed resentment, how Sophia touched her husband's arm possessively while her eyes tracked Dominic's every movement. These were people living in a pressure cooker of ambition, loyalty, and fear, and Clara had just been dropped into the center of it with a target on her back and evidence of Sophia's crimes in her possession. When dessert was served, Dominic stood. If you'll excuse us, Clara and I have matters to attend to. Mother, thank you for a wonderful dinner. He pulled out Clara's chair and she rose gratefully, ready to escape the weight of all those watching eyes. But as they moved toward the door, Sophia's voice stopped them. One moment, Dominic. She stood, wineglass in hand. I wanted to mention there were some irregularities in the Maritime Solutions accounts this quarter. Nothing serious, just some confusion with invoice coding. I've already asked my accountant to investigate. Clara felt Dominic go still beside her. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. Sophia knew someone was looking into her records, which meant she either had been tipped off or was smart enough to sense danger. I'm sure it's nothing, Dominic said, his voice pleasant and empty of emotion. But please keep me informed. We can't afford discrepancies in our shipping operations. Of course. Sophia's smile was sharp. I'm always very careful with the family business. Loyalty and accuracy, those are my priorities. The emphasis on loyalty was deliberate, a message wrapped in politeness. Clara could almost see the chess game playing out. Sophia warning Dominic that she knew she was under scrutiny, Dominic acknowledging the warning without confirming anything. They left the dining room, and Dominic didn't speak until they were back in the library with the door closed. She knows, Clara said immediately. Yes. Dominic poured himself a drink, his movements controlled but tense. Which means we accelerate the timeline. I need that report tonight, and I need it to be airtight. If we're going to move against Sophia, we can't afford any gaps in the evidence. She's your sister-in-law, Clara said, though she knew it was pointless. Your brother's wife. She's a thief who's been stealing from this family for 2 years. Dominic turned to face her, and Clara saw cold fury in his eyes. Family loyalty goes both ways. She violated that the moment she put her hand in our pockets. Clara sat down at the laptop, pulling up her files. What about Antonio? Do you think he knows? I don't know yet. That's what you're going to help me determine. Dominic came to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. Look at Antonio's personal accounts, his expenses, his investments. If he's living beyond his means or making purchases that don't match his income, he's either complicit or benefiting indirectly. Clara dove back into the data, this time focusing on Antonio's financial profile. What she found over the next 3 hours painted a complicated picture. Antonio wasn't stealing, but he was certainly benefiting. Expensive gifts, luxury purchases, a lifestyle that exceeded his legitimate income from the family business. He might not know the source, Clara said finally, compiling her findings, but he's definitely enjoying the proceeds. Which means he'll defend her when confronted. Dominic read through Clara's report with methodical precision. This is good work. Comprehensive, documented, traceable. Tomorrow, I'll present this to the family council. What happens then? Justice, Dominic said simply. My kind of justice. Clara felt sick. She'd done exactly what he'd asked, built an airtight case against people she'd just met. In less than 48 hours, she'd gone from invisible daughter to architect of someone else's downfall. Get some rest, Dominic said, logging out of the laptop and removing the flash drive. You did well tonight, at dinner and with the investigation. Continue like this, and we'll get along fine. He left her alone in the library, and Clara sat in the silence, staring at her hands. The same hands that had signed a marriage certificate. The same hands that had typed up evidence that would destroy Sophia Rinaldi's life. She was becoming exactly what Dominic needed, a weapon he could aim at his enemies. The question was whether she could survive being that weapon without losing herself completely. Clara walked back to her rooms, exhausted and troubled. Maria had left clothes for tomorrow and turned down the bed. Everything was perfect, controlled, orchestrated, just like Clara's new life. She changed and climbed into bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Instead, she lay in the dark, thinking about betrayal and justice and the very thin line between the two. Tomorrow, Dominic would bring the evidence to the family council. Tomorrow, the careful facade she'd witnessed at dinner would crack open, and Clara would have been the one to swing the hammer. The hammer fell at precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon. Clara had spent the morning in her rooms, unable to focus on anything, waiting for word from Dominic about the family council. Maria brought breakfast and tried to make conversation, but Clara could barely manage responses. She kept seeing Sophia's face from the dinner table, that calculating smile, those sharp eyes that had already sensed danger circling. When the summons finally came, it wasn't from Dominic. It was from Vittoria herself. Mrs. Rinaldi would like you to join the family council, Maria said, her expression carefully neutral. The meeting is in the West Conference Room. I'll show you the way. Clara's hands went cold. I thought I was just providing research. I didn't expect to attend the actual— Mr. Rinaldi insists you be present, Maria interrupted gently. He says your testimony may be required. Testimony. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Dominic wasn't just using her research. He was making her the primary witness. She would have to stand in front of his entire family and detail exactly how she'd uncovered Sophia's theft. There would be no hiding behind documents or letting Dominic present the findings himself. He was forcing Clara into the spotlight, making her an active participant in whatever came next. Maria led her through the mansion to a wing Clara hadn't seen before. The West Conference Room turned out to be a formal boardroom with a massive table, high-back chairs, and windows that overlooked the estate's private gardens. It looked like a place where corporate mergers happened, not family confrontations. But the people gathered around that table weren't business executives. They were the Rinaldi family in full force. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from granite. Vittoria occupied the seat to his right, regal and watchful. Antonio was across from her, his face already flushed with anger or wine or both. Sophia sat beside her husband, perfectly composed except for the white-knuckle grip she had on the edge of the table. The rest of the seats were filled with people Clara recognized from dinner. Cousins, trusted advisors, the family lawyer Marcus Volterra, who had collected her from her father's house barely 3 days ago. All of them turned to look at Clara when she entered. "Mrs. Rinaldi," Dominic said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Please sit." Clara moved to the indicated seat, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movement. She sat down carefully, folding her hands in her lap to hide their shaking. "Now that we're all assembled," Dominic began, his voice calm and authoritative, "we can begin. 3 days ago, I became aware of financial irregularities in our maritime operations. I asked my wife, who has considerable expertise in financial analysis, to investigate. The emphasis on my wife made Clara's role clear to everyone in the room. She wasn't just an analyst, she was Dominic's personal weapon, loyal to him above all others. What Clara discovered," Dominic continued, nodding to Marcus, who began distributing bound copies of Clara's report, "is a systematic pattern of theft spanning at least 2 years. False invoicing, inflated cargo values, and money disappearing into shell accounts. All of it coordinated through Maritime Solutions Group." Sophia's composure cracked slightly. "That's impossible. I personally oversee every transaction through Maritime Solutions. If there were discrepancies, I would have caught them." "Would you?" Dominic's tone was mild, but Clara heard the steel underneath. "Or did you create them?" The room went silent. Antonio half rose from his seat. "Dominic, what the hell are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything, brother. I'm stating facts." Dominic opened his copy of the report to a marked page. "Clara, please explain to the council what you found." Clara's mouth went dry. Every face at that table was turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical, some already hostile. She thought about refusing, about telling Dominic to present his own evidence. But the weight of his expectation and the ring on her finger reminded her that she didn't have that luxury. "The pattern started approximately 26 months ago," Clara said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "Small discrepancies at first, invoices that were 5 to 7% higher than the actual cargo values. Over time, the amounts increased, but never enough to trigger automatic fraud alerts in the accounting system." "How much are we talking about?" one of the cousins asked. Clara glanced at Dominic, who nodded for her to continue. "Total theft over 2 years amounts to approximately $740,000. The money was routed through shell accounts and eventually disappeared into offshore holdings." Gasps rippled around the table. Antonio's face had gone from flushed to pale. $750,000? That's not possible. Sophia would never— "The evidence is comprehensive," Marcus interjected, tapping his copy of the report. "Invoice records, bank transfers, shell company registrations. All of it leads back to accounts controlled by Mrs. Sophia Rinaldi." Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is a setup. Someone is trying to frame me, and you're all buying into it because she—" Sophia pointed at Clara with a shaking hand. "Shows up with some convenient spreadsheets and accusations?" "The spreadsheets aren't convenient," Clara said quietly. "They're your own records. I didn't create the false invoices or the shell accounts. I just found them." How convenient that Dominic's new wife, who none of us knew existed until 3 days ago, suddenly discovers this massive conspiracy. Sophia's voice pitched higher. "This whole thing is designed to discredit me, to push me out, because Dominic never wanted Antonio to have any real power in this family." "Sophia, stop," Antonio said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No." Sophia slammed her hands on the table. "I have given everything to this family. I've managed the maritime operations flawlessly for 5 years, built relationships with every major shipping company on the East Coast, and this is how I'm repaid? With accusations and betrayal?" Vittoria spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through Sophia's hysteria like a blade. "If the accusations are false, then you should welcome the opportunity to prove it. Cooperate with a full audit, provide access to all your accounts, and clear your name." Sophia's eyes darted around the table, looking for allies and finding none. "You've already decided I'm guilty. All of you. You want me gone, so you're using her," again pointing at Clara, "as your excuse." The evidence speaks for itself, Dominic said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But if you insist you're innocent, then explain the shell companies. Explain the offshore accounts registered in your name. Explain how invoices you personally approved ended up being 15% higher than the actual cargo values. I don't have to explain anything to you. Sophia's composure shattered completely. You're not my judge and jury, Dominic. You might run this family like a dictator, but I have rights. You have responsibilities, Dominic corrected coldly. Responsibilities you violated when you stole from this family, and now you'll face the consequences. Antonio finally found his voice, standing to face his brother. What consequences? What are you planning to do to my wife? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Clara watched Dominic carefully, seeing the calculation behind his eyes. This was the moment where family loyalty would be tested, where Antonio would have to choose between his wife and his brother. That depends on Antonio, Dominic said, his gaze never leaving his brother's face. Are you complicit in this theft? Did you know what Sophia was doing? Of course I didn't know. Antonio's denial came too fast, too desperate. I trusted her to manage the administrative side while I focused on operations. If she was stealing, she hid it from me too. Clara saw the lie in his body language, the way his eyes shifted left, the tension in his shoulders. Antonio might not have known the specifics, but he'd known something was wrong. He'd just chosen not to look too closely at the source of his improved lifestyle. Dominic saw it too. Clara watched his expression harden. You're either incompetent or complicit, Antonio. Either you failed to notice your own wife stealing $750,000, or you knew and didn't care as long as you benefited. That's not fair, Antonio said, but the protest was weak. Fair? Dominic's voice dropped to something dangerous. You want to talk about fair? Our family trusted Sophia with critical operations, and she betrayed that trust. She stole from us, from our business, from our legacy. And you're asking me to be fair? Vittoria stood, commanding immediate silence. Enough. This council is not a place for emotional outbursts. She looked at Sophia with cold assessment. The evidence is compelling. Unless you can provide proof of your innocence, the council has no choice but to accept these findings as truth. Mother, please. Antonio started, but Vittoria raised a hand. My son, your loyalty to your wife is commendable, but this family's survival depends on trust and accountability. If Sophia has stolen from us, she must answer for it. If she's innocent, she'll have the opportunity to prove it through a complete forensic audit. Sophia laughed, a brittle sound. A forensic audit controlled by Dominic's people, investigating records Dominic's wife compiled. I'm sure that will be completely unbiased. Then suggest an alternative, Vittoria said. Propose an independent auditor, someone beyond Dominic's influence. We'll review their findings. For a moment, Clara thought Sophia might accept the offer. It was reasonable, fair even. But then she saw something shift in Sophia's expression, a cornered animal realizing there was no escape. You want to know the truth? Sophia said, her voice suddenly calm in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. Fine. Yes, I created the shell accounts. Yes, I inflated the invoices. Yes, I took the money. Shock rippled through the room. Even Dominic looked surprised by the outright admission. But I'm not the one you should be investigating, Sophia continued, her eyes locked on Dominic. I'm just the accountant who processed the transactions, the person who ordered me to do it, who planned the whole operation. That's who you should be questioning. Antonio grabbed his wife's arm. Sophia, stop talking. She shook him off. Why? They already think I'm guilty. They've already decided to destroy me. At least I can take the real traitor down with me. Dominic leaned forward, his entire attention focused on Sophia. Who ordered you to steal from this family? Sophia smiled, triumphant and vicious. Your trusted legal counsel. Your right hand. The man who's sitting at this table right now, who helped compile that lovely report condemning me. She turned to point directly at Marcus Volterra. Him. The accusation landed like a bomb. Every head swiveled to look at Marcus, who had gone absolutely still, his face carefully blank. That's absurd, Marcus said, but Clara heard the slight tremor in his voice. I've served this family for 15 years. Why would I jeopardize that by orchestrating theft? Because you're greedy, Sophia said. Because you saw an opportunity to siphon money through maritime operations and blame it on the administrative staff. You approached me 2 years ago with a simple proposition. I process the false invoices, route the money where you tell me, and we split the proceeds 60-40. Lies, Marcus said, standing. Dominic, this is clearly a desperate attempt to deflect blame. She's caught, so she's inventing a conspiracy to— Then explain the offshore accounts, Sophia interrupted. The ones registered to a company called Volterra Holdings, the ones where my 40% ended up, right alongside your 60%. Marcus's expression fractured for just a second, long enough for Clara to see the guilt underneath. I don't know what you're talking about. Liar! Sophia pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I kept insurance, Marcus, emails, wire transfer receipts, recordings of our conversations. I'm not going down alone. Dominic stood slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Is this true, Marcus? The lawyer looked at his employer, and Clara saw the moment he decided there was no point in continuing the charade. His shoulders sagged, and something like resignation crossed his face. She's exaggerating, Marcus said carefully. It wasn't 60-40. It was 50-50. I came up with the plan, but Sophia executed it. We're equally responsible. The admission stunned the room into silence. Clara felt like she was watching a house of cards collapse, each revelation more shocking than the last. 15 years, Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. 15 years of loyalty, of trust, of handling the family's most sensitive legal matters. And you've been stealing from me for 2 of them. Not from you, Marcus corrected, and Clara heard desperation creeping into his tone. From the business, from accounts that wouldn't be missed. We were careful, selective. You were thieves. Dominic's words fell like hammer blows. Both of you. You betrayed this family, betrayed the trust we placed in you, and you did it for money. Everyone in this room has done worse for money, Sophia shot back. Don't pretend this family built its empire on honor and integrity. We all know what you do, Dominic. We all know where the real money comes from, so spare me the righteous indignation. Vittoria's hand came down hard on the table. That's enough. This council will not tolerate— But Sophia was past caring. No, let's be honest for once. This family survives on theft, extortion, and violence. We're all criminals here. I just had the audacity to steal from other criminals instead of civilians. At least I was stealing from people who could afford the loss. Antonio tried again to silence his wife. But she was in full fury now, burning every bridge she had left. And you— Sophia turned on Clara with venom in her eyes. You self-righteous little accountant. You think you're better than me? You married into this family under duress, got forced into Dominic's bed because of your father's debts, and now you're playing detective to earn your keep. We're not so different, you and I. We're both prisoners here, just trying to survive. Clara met Sophia's gaze steadily. I'm not the one who stole $750,000 from the people who trusted me. No, you just helped Dominic destroy 2 people to prove your loyalty. That's so much more noble. Sophia's laugh was bitter. Give it time, Clara. You'll learn that in this family, everyone gets their hands dirty eventually. The only question is how much blood you're willing to tolerate. Dominic moved with sudden violence, his chair crashing backward. Get them out of here, both of them. Antonio, take your wife and leave this house. Marcus, you have 1 hour to clear your office before security escorts you out. What about my money? Marcus demanded. I have accounts, assets, connections. Consider them forfeit, Dominic said flatly. You're lucky I'm letting you leave alive. The threat was explicit, and Marcus went pale. You can't just— I can do whatever I want. This is my family, my business, my empire. You forgot that when you decided to steal from me. Dominic gestured to the 2 security guards who had appeared at the door. 1 hour. If you're still on my property after that, we'll have a different kind of conversation. The guards moved forward, and Marcus had enough survival instinct left to go quietly. Sophia wasn't so cooperative, struggling against Antonio's grip as he tried to pull her toward the door. This isn't over, she screamed. What? I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything about your operations, your smuggling, your— Antonio clamped a hand over her mouth, dragging her bodily from the room. The door slammed behind them, muffling Sophia's continued threats. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding. She'd expected consequences, but not this. Not a full-scale implosion that had revealed not one traitor but two, that had destroyed relationships and split the family down the middle. Vittoria was the first to speak. Well, that was illuminating. One of the cousins laughed nervously. Illuminating? It was a disaster. Marcus Volterra handled half our legal affairs. How are we supposed to? We'll manage, Dominic interrupted, his voice returning to its usual controlled calm. Marcus will be replaced. The maritime operations will be restructured, and Sophia's threat to go to the police will be neutralized before she reaches the city limits. The casual way he said neutralized made Clara's blood run cold. You're going to kill her! Every head turned to look at her. Clara realized she'd spoken aloud, that she'd challenged Dominic in front of his entire family council. But she couldn't take the words back now. I'm going to ensure she doesn't become a liability, Dominic corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Clara stood, her fear transforming into something reckless. Because it sounds like you're planning to murder your brother's wife to keep her quiet. Clara. Vittoria's tone was warning, but Clara was past caution. I agreed to help you find a traitor. I didn't agree to participate in murder. Dominic looked at her with an expression that was almost amused. What did you think would happen when you compiled that evidence? Did you imagine we'd have a stern conversation and then let them go with a slap on the wrist? I thought, Clara faltered, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on the investigation, on proving herself useful to Dominic, that she hadn't considered the end game. You thought you could uncover betrayal without consequences, Dominic finished for her. That's naive, Mrs. Rinaldi. In this family, betrayal has one consequence, swift and permanent. Clara looked around the table at the assembled family members. None of them looked shocked or disturbed by Dominic's implication. They all understood the rules of this world better than she did. I won't be part of this, Clara said, even though she knew it was futile. I found your traitors. That's what you asked for, but I won't help you kill them. Good thing I'm not asking for your help with that part, Dominic said. Your role is finished. You did excellent work, and now you can return to your comfortable rooms while I handle the cleanup. The dismissal was clear. Clara was useful for investigation, but not trusted with the darker aspects of Dominic's business. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt sick. She left the conference room without looking back, walking blindly through the mansion's halls, until she found herself in the gardens. The sun was warm, the flowers were blooming, and somewhere behind the beautiful facade, people were planning to commit murder based on evidence she had provided. Clara sank onto a stone bench, her hands shaking. Sophia had been right about one thing. They weren't so different. Both of them had done what they thought necessary to survive in a world that gave them limited options. Sophia had stolen money. Clara had sold her freedom and her conscience. The question was whether either choice was forgivable. She didn't know how long she sat there before Vittoria found her. The older woman appeared on the garden path, still elegant despite the chaos of the council meeting, and sat down beside Clara without invitation. You're upset, Vittoria observed. Clara laughed bitterly. I just helped orchestrate two people's downfall. I think upset is an understatement. You uncovered theft and betrayal. That's different from orchestrating downfall. Vittoria's tone was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. Sophia and Marcus made their choices. They knew the risks. And now they'll die for it? Probably. Vittoria didn't sugarcoat it. My son doesn't tolerate betrayal. He can't, not in his position. If word got out that people could steal from the Rinaldi family without consequences, we'd have a dozen more attempts within a month. So it's just business, Clara said flatly. Kill them to make an example. Kill them to protect the family, Vittoria corrected. Including you. Sophia threatened to go to the police. If she does that, if she starts talking about our operations, everyone connected to this family becomes vulnerable, including Dominic's new wife, who compiled evidence of fraud. The implication was clear. Clara's own safety depended on Sophia's silence. Either Sophia stayed quiet, or she stayed permanently silent. There was no middle ground. I didn't want this, Clara whispered. I know. Vittoria's hand, weathered but strong, covered Clara's. But this is the world you married into. Dominic should have explained the full implications before asking for your help. That's on him, not you. He told me to find a traitor. I found two. You did your job exceptionally well, too well, perhaps. Vittoria smiled slightly. You made Dominic look like a genius for marrying you. The entire council saw your capabilities today. That will serve you well in the future, even if it's uncomfortable in the present. Clara looked at the woman beside her, Dominic's mother, the matriarch of a criminal empire, someone who had survived decades in this world by being smart and ruthless in equal measure. How do you live with it? Clara asked. The violence, the betrayals, the constant calculating? Vittoria was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. You find things worth protecting. Family, legacy, the few people you can truly trust. Everything else becomes background noise, necessary evils to preserve what matters. And if you can't find anything worth protecting, then you leave, or you break, or you become something you don't recognize anymore. Vittoria stood, smoothing her skirt. But I don't think you'll break, Clara. You're stronger than you realize. Dominic saw that. That's why he chose you. She walked away, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts, and the growing certainty that she'd crossed a line today that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd proven herself valuable to Dominic, earned his trust and his family's respect, but the cost had been her illusion that she could participate in this world without getting blood on her hands. Even if she never pulled a trigger or gave an order, Sophia and Marcus would die because of the evidence Clara compiled. That made her complicit, whether she wanted to acknowledge it or not. Clara stood, brushing off her dress and heading back toward the mansion. She would return to her rooms, take a long shower, and try to pretend that she was still the person she'd been 4 days ago, someone who fixed problems quietly and tried to stay invisible. But that person was gone. In her place was someone who had survived her first test in the Rinaldi family by helping to identify and condemn 2 traitors, someone who understood that in this world, information was power, and power came with blood on it. As Clara climbed the stairs to her wing, she passed a window overlooking the front drive. 2 SUVs were pulling away from the mansion, probably carrying Antonio and Sophia to whatever fate Dominic had planned. Marcus's car was already gone. Clara didn't watch them leave. She just kept walking, counting steps, focusing on breathing, trying not to think about what came next. But when she reached her rooms and closed the door behind her, she finally let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding all day. Sophia had been right about one thing. Everyone in this family got their hands dirty eventually. Clara had just discovered that she could compile evidence and present findings without flinching, that she could participate in someone's downfall and still sleep at night. She didn't know whether that made her strong or broken, but she knew it made her exactly what Dominic needed, someone smart enough to be useful and pragmatic enough to survive. The real question was whether surviving in this world was worth what it would cost her soul. Clara didn't have an answer yet, but as she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, seeing the polished exterior and haunted eyes, she suspected she'd find out soon enough. The Rinaldi family had a way of testing people, of pushing them until they either broke or became something harder. Clara had survived the first test, but she had a feeling there would be many more to come, each one asking her to compromise a little more, to accept a little more darkness, until the line between victim and participant disappeared completely. And the most terrifying part was that she wasn't sure she cared anymore. Not if caring meant being powerless again. Not if caring meant going back to being invisible, ignored, disposable. Dominic had given her power, purpose, and protection. The price was her conscience and her complicity. Standing there in her gilded cage, Clara wasn't certain the trade was worth it, but she was certain she'd already made it, and there was no going back now. The next morning, Clara woke to find an envelope slid under her door. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words in Dominic's precise handwriting. It's handled. D. She stared at those words for a long time, understanding their full meaning. Sophia and Marcus were gone. Not just gone from the estate or gone from the family business, but gone in the permanent way that Dominic's world demanded. Clara had suspected it would happen quickly, but seeing the confirmation in black and white made her stomach turn. She burned the note in the bathroom sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Then she got dressed and went downstairs because hiding in her rooms would only prove she was too weak for this world. Maria was waiting in the hallway outside the dining room. Mrs. Rinaldi, Mr. Rinaldi asked me to inform you that he'll be occupied with business today. but he expects to see you at dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. Of course, Clara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Thank you, Maria. She ate breakfast alone in a dining room that felt cavernous without other people filling it. The food was excellent, the coffee perfect, and Clara tasted none of it. She kept thinking about Sophia's final words at the council meeting, about how everyone in this family got their hands dirty eventually. Clara's hands felt filthy now, even though she'd only compiled spreadsheets and traced money flows. The distance between analysis and execution should have felt wider, but it didn't. She'd provided the ammunition. The fact that someone else pulled the trigger didn't absolve her of responsibility. She was clearing her plate when Vittoria appeared in the doorway, elegant in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Clara's old car. Walk with me, Vittoria said, not quite a request, but not quite a command either. Clara followed her out into the gardens, where the morning sun cast everything in golden light that seemed obscenely beautiful given what had happened in the last 24 hours. They walked in silence for several minutes before Vittoria finally spoke. You're wondering if you did the right thing? It wasn't a question, so Clara didn't answer. She just kept walking, focusing on the manicured paths and carefully cultivated roses that probably required a team of gardeners to maintain. Sophia and Marcus made their choices long before you arrived, Vittoria continued. They chose to steal, to betray, to prioritize their greed over their loyalty. What happened to them is a consequence of those choices, not of your investigation. Oh, that's a convenient way to frame it, Clara said quietly. Vittoria stopped walking, turning to face her. It's the truth. Do you think if you hadn't found the evidence, they would have stopped stealing? Do you think they would have suddenly developed a conscience and returned the money? No, Clara admitted. They would have continued until they were caught by someone else or until they stole enough to disappear. Either way, the outcome would have been the same. You simply accelerated the timeline. Vittoria's expression softened slightly. I understand this is difficult. You weren't raised in this world. You have moral frameworks that don't quite fit the reality you're living in now. Is that what you call it? Moral frameworks that don't fit? Clara couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. I helped condemn 2 people to death. That's not a framework problem. That's a soul problem. Perhaps. Vittoria resumed walking, and Clara fell into step beside her. But consider this. If you had refused to investigate, if you had told Dominic no, what would have happened? Clara had already thought about this during her sleepless night. He would have found someone else to do it. Exactly. And that person might not have been as thorough or as careful. They might have missed connections, overlooked evidence, or worse, falsely accused innocent people. Your precision ensured that only the guilty were identified. It was a rationalization, but Clara found herself clinging to it anyway. At least she'd been accurate. At least the people who faced consequences were actually guilty of the crimes they were accused of. There's something else you should know, Vittoria said, her tone shifting. Antonio has been removed from his position overseeing maritime operations. Dominic has asked the family council to reassign those responsibilities. To whom? Vittoria's slight smile told Clara the answer before she spoke. To you? Clara stopped walking. What? That's insane. I've been part of this family for 4 days. I don't know anything about running shipping operations. You know enough to uncover a 2-year conspiracy that everyone else missed. You understand the financial systems, the documentation requirements, the audit trails. Dominic believes that makes you more qualified than most of our current managers. Dominic believes it gives him more control, Clara countered. If I'm running maritime operations, he can monitor everything I do, ensure I'm not stealing the way Sophia and Marcus did. That too, Vittoria agreed without hesitation. But it's also an opportunity, Clara. Real authority, real influence within the family structure. Most people spend decades earning the kind of position Dominic is offering you. I don't want it. Then you're a fool. Vittoria's tone turned sharp. You're in this world whether you want to be or not. The marriage contract ensures that. You can either be a passive participant, shut away in your rooms while decisions are made around you, or you can take the power being offered and learn to use it. Clara stared at the older woman, seeing the steel beneath the elegant exterior. Vittoria Rinaldi hadn't survived decades as the matriarch of a crime family by being passive or delicate. She'd learned to wield power, to make hard choices, to protect what mattered, even when the cost was high. What if I make mistakes? Claire asked. You will. Everyone does. Vittoria's expression gentled again. But Dominic will have people supporting you, teaching you what you need to know. And you'll learn quickly. You've already proven that. They walked in silence for a few more minutes, Clara's mind racing. Taking the position meant committing more fully to this world, accepting not just the marriage but an active role in the family's criminal enterprise. It meant crossing another line, becoming complicit in ways that went beyond simple investigation. But refusing meant remaining powerless, dependent entirely on Dominic's goodwill and protection. It meant staying in the gilded cage with no key of her own. "I'll think about it," Clara said finally. "Don't think too long," Vittoria advised. "Dominic will expect an answer by tonight. He's not patient with indecision." They parted at the garden entrance, Vittoria heading back into the house, while Clara stood alone among the roses, trying to decide which version of herself she wanted to become. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Clara spent hours in her rooms, pacing and thinking, trying to weigh options that all seemed equally terrible in different ways. She could accept Dominic's offer and become an active participant in organized crime. Or she could refuse and remain a prisoner with no agency, no power, no future, except whatever Dominic decided to give her. Neither choice felt right. But maybe that was the point. In this world, there were no right choices. There were only choices that helped you survive. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, Clara had made her decision. She dressed carefully in a dark blue dress that struck a balance between professional and elegant, then made her way to the private dining room where Dominic was waiting. He stood when she entered, pulling out her chair with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his reputation. They were alone. No family, no advisors, just the two of them and a table set for an intimate dinner. "You look lovely," Dominic said, which was probably the first personal compliment he'd given her that wasn't somehow tied to her usefulness. "Thank you," Clara replied, sitting down and accepting the wine he poured. "Your mother told me about your offer, the maritime operations position." "And?" Dominic settled into his own chair, watching her with that calculating expression she'd come to recognize. Clara took a sip of wine, buying herself a moment to organize her thoughts. "I'll accept, on 3 conditions." Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're negotiating?" "I'm clarifying terms," Clara corrected. "You want me to take on significant responsibilities in your organization. I want to ensure I have the support and authority to actually do the job." A smile played at the corners of Dominic's mouth. "I'm listening." "First, I want full access to all maritime records, not just the financial data, but operational logs, personnel files, everything. I can't manage what I can't see." "Agreed. What else?" "Second, I want direct authority over hiring and firing within the maritime division. If I'm going to rebuild after Sophia's mess, I need to know I can make changes without waiting for approval from 6 different people." Dominic considered this, swirling his wine. "You'll have authority over administrative and support staff. Management-level positions still require my approval. I won't have you installing your own network without oversight." It was a reasonable compromise. Clara nodded. "And third, I want my father's debt officially cleared. Publicly, legally, completely. No outstanding obligations, no hidden clauses, nothing that gives you leverage over my family." "Your family sold you to clear that debt," Dominic pointed out. "Why do you care whether it's officially resolved?" "Because I want this to be a choice going forward," Clara said firmly. "I'm accepting this position, accepting my role in your organization, but I need to know it's because I choose to stay, not because I'm being coerced through my father's failures." Dominic studied her for a long moment, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. This was important. The difference between being a hostage and being a participant between slavery and employment, even if the employer was a criminal. "Done," Dominic said finally. "I'll have Marcus's replacement draw up the discharge papers. Your father's debt will be officially cleared within the week." Relief washed through Clara, even though she knew it changed nothing about her fundamental situation. She was still married to a mob boss, still living in his house, still complicit in his crimes. But at least now it would be her choice to stay. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. You have no idea what you're taking on." Dominic gestured for the staff to begin serving dinner. "The maritime operations are a disaster right now. Sophia wasn't just stealing, she was also neglecting basic management. We have shipments delayed, contracts in dispute. relationships with port authorities that need to be rebuilt. I'll handle it, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. I know you will. Dominic's tone was matter of fact. That's why I'm giving you the position. But understand this, Clara. Taking on this role means you're no longer just my wife on paper. You're part of the family business. You'll attend meetings, make decisions that affect people's livelihoods, and yes, sometimes you'll have to make hard choices that have consequences. Like the consequences Sophia and Marcus faced. He didn't say it, but the implication hung in the air between them. I understand, Clara said. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Clara was surprised to find she was actually hungry. The food was excellent, some kind of pasta with seafood that melted on her tongue, paired with a wine that probably cost more than her monthly salary used to be. There's something I need to tell you, Dominic said, setting down his fork. About yesterday. About Sophia and Marcus. Clara's appetite vanished. I don't need details. Yes, you do. Because the version you're imagining in your head is probably worse than what actually happened. Dominic leaned back in his chair. Marcus was given a choice. Disappear voluntarily with enough money to start over somewhere far from here, or refuse and face permanent consequences. He chose to disappear. He's on a plane to South America right now with a new identity and a substantial payment in exchange for his silence. Clara blinked, processing this. You let him go. I let him leave. There's a difference. He's been removed from the family, stripped of his position and connections, and if he ever tries to return or contact anyone we know, the consequences will be severe. But he's alive. And Sophia? Dominic's expression hardened. Sophia wasn't given the same choice because she made threats. She said she'd go to the police, expose our operations, destroy the family if we moved against her. That kind of threat can't be tolerated. Clara's stomach turned. So you killed her? No, Dominic said quietly. Antonio did. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. What? My brother had to choose between his wife and his family. Sophia had stolen from us, threatened us, proven herself disloyal in every way that mattered. I gave Antonio the choice. Handle it himself and maintain his position in the family, or refuse and lose everything. That's not a choice, Clara whispered. That's torture. That's justice, Dominic corrected. Antonio married her, brought her into this family, vouched for her trustworthiness. Her betrayal was his responsibility. He had to be the one to answer for it. Clara pushed her plate away, her hands shaking. You made your brother kill his own wife. I gave him the opportunity to prove his loyalty and reclaim his honor. He made his choice. Dominic's voice remained calm, almost gentle. I know this is difficult for you to understand, but in our world, loyalty is everything. Without it, the entire structure collapses. Antonio understood that. Did he? Clara challenged. Or did he just understand that if he refused, you'd kill him too? Perhaps both. Dominic didn't try to sugarcoat it. But the result is the same. The threat has been neutralized. Antonio has proven himself, and the family remains intact. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. This was the world she'd agreed to join more fully by accepting the maritime position. This was the reality of the power Vittoria had encouraged her to embrace, power built on blood and enforced through terror. I need air, Clara said, standing abruptly. Dominic didn't try to stop her. Take all the time you need. But Clara? She paused at the door. What happened to Sophia and Marcus would have happened with or without your investigation. You didn't cause their downfall. You just revealed it. Remember that. Clara left without responding, walking quickly through the mansion until she found herself back in the gardens. The evening air was cool against her flushed skin, and she gulped it down, trying to calm the nausea churning in her stomach. Antonio had killed his own wife. Dominic had forced him to choose between Sophia and the family, knowing exactly which choice Antonio would make to survive. It was calculated, brutal, and designed to ensure that everyone understood the consequences of betrayal. And Clara had helped make it happen by uncovering the evidence that proved Sophia's guilt. She sank onto the same bench where she'd sat yesterday with Vittoria, staring up at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to appear, distant and cold, and completely indifferent to the drama playing out below them. I thought I might find you here. Clara turned to see Vittoria approaching, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. The older woman sat down beside her without invitation, following Clara's gaze up to the stars. "Dominic told you," Vittoria said. Not a question. "About Antonio. About what he made him do." Clara's voice was hollow. "What Antonio chose to do," Vittoria corrected gently. "My son is many things, but he's not a puppeteer. He gave Antonio a choice, difficult as it was. Antonio made his decision based on his own priorities and his own understanding of what the family requires. That's a convenient way to absolve Dominic of responsibility. No, it's an acknowledgement that everyone in this family makes their own choices." Vittoria's voice was firm. Antonio could have refused. He could have chosen his wife over his family, accepted the consequences, and walked away. He didn't. That's on him, not on Dominic. Clara shook her head. "You're also good at justifying terrible things." "We're all good at surviving," Vittoria corrected. "That's what this family does. We survive, we adapt, we make the hard choices that allow us to continue existing in a world that would destroy us if we showed weakness." "And if the cost of survival is your soul?" Vittoria smiled sadly. "Then you decide whether having a soul matters more than having a life. Different people make different choices about that balance." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one. Clara thought about choices and consequences, about the line between victim and participant, about how quickly circumstances could transform someone from one into the other. "I accepted Dominic's offer," Clara said finally. "The maritime position. I'm going to take it." "I know," Vittoria said. "You're too pragmatic not to, but now you're wondering if that makes you complicit in everything the family does." "Doesn't it?" "Yes," Vittoria said simply. "But you were already complicit the moment you married Dominic, the moment you agreed to investigate the theft, the moment you compiled that evidence. The maritime position just makes your complicity more active and more visible." Clara wanted to argue, to insist there was a difference between being forced into marriage and actively choosing to manage criminal operations. But Vittoria was right. The line had already been crossed. This was just the next step on a path Clara had started walking days ago. "Does it get easier?" Clara asked. "Living with the choices, the compromises, the knowledge of what you're part of?" Vittoria considered the question carefully. "It gets more familiar. I'm not sure that's the same as easier. You learn to compartmentalize, to focus on the aspects of your life that you can control and accept the aspects you can't. You find meaning where you can and try not to dwell on the darkness." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Vittoria agreed, "but it's also the price of power. And power, my dear, is the only thing that gives you any control over your own fate in this world." They stood together, and Vittoria surprised Clara by pulling her into a brief embrace. "You're stronger than you think," she said quietly. "You'll survive this, and you'll learn to thrive. I have faith in that." She left Clara alone in the garden, and Clara stood there until the stars were fully visible, trying to recognize herself in the choices she'd made and the person she was becoming. When she finally returned to the house, she found Dominic waiting in the library. He looked up from his paperwork as she entered, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, which was probably the last thing Clara expected to hear from him. "For what?" "For not preparing you better. For not explaining the full implications of what I was asking you to do." Dominic set down his pen. "I needed your skills, and I used our marriage contract to ensure your cooperation, but I should have been more honest about what finding the traitors would mean." Clara sat down across from him, studying his face for signs of manipulation or calculation. But he seemed genuinely regretful, or at least as close to regretful as someone like Dominic Rinaldi could get. "Would it have changed anything?" Clara asked. "If you told me up front that Sophia and Marcus would die if I found evidence against them, would I have refused?" "I don't know. Would you have?" Clara thought about it honestly. "Probably not. I was already trapped. I would have done the investigation anyway, told myself I was just gathering information, and tried not to think about the consequences." "Which is exactly what you did," Dominic pointed out. "Yes." Clara met his eyes. "Which makes me complicit, whether I wanted to acknowledge it or not. For what it's worth, I respect how you handled the council meeting. You presented the evidence clearly, answered questions honestly, and didn't try to minimize what you'd found. That took courage. Or stupidity." Sometimes they're the same thing. Dominic's slight smile returned. I heard you accepted the maritime position. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm doing it for myself, not for you. Even better, Dominic said. People who work out of self-interest are more reliable than people who work out of loyalty or fear. Self-interest is honest. Clara couldn't argue with that logic, twisted as it was. She stood, suddenly exhausted. I'm going to bed. When do I start the new position? Monday. That gives you the weekend to review the files and prepare. I'll have everything sent to your rooms tomorrow morning. Clara nodded and headed for the door, but Dominic's voice stopped her. Clara? For what it's worth, I think you'll be good at this. Better than Sophia ever was, and probably better than Antonio. You see patterns other people miss, and you're not afraid to ask difficult questions. Those are valuable qualities. In your world, maybe, Clara said. I'm not sure they're qualities I wanted to develop. We rarely get to choose which parts of ourselves circumstances bring out, Dominic replied. We only get to choose what we do with those parts once they emerge. Clara left him there, climbing the stairs to her wing with his words echoing in her mind. She'd uncovered capabilities she didn't know she had. The ability to analyze complex criminal operations, to present damning evidence without flinching, to accept morally compromised choices in service of survival and power. Whether those capabilities made her strong or broken remained to be seen. But as Clara prepared for bed in her beautiful prison, she knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer the invisible daughter who fixed problems quietly and asked for nothing in return. She was Clara Rinaldi now, wife to a mob boss, investigator who'd uncovered a conspiracy, soon to be manager of maritime operations in a criminal empire. The question wasn't whether she could do the job. It was whether she could live with herself afterward. Clara suspected she'd find out on Monday when the real work began and the comfortable distance between analysis and action disappeared completely. For now, she had the weekend to prepare, to study the files Dominic would send, and to build whatever armor she needed around her conscience to survive in this new role. As she lay in the darkness, Clara wondered if her father or Vanessa ever thought about what they'd traded her for. Probably not. They were safe in their comfortable house, cleared of their debts, free to live their lives without consequences. While Clara paid the price for their mistakes by becoming something she'd never wanted to be, powerful, complicit, and irrevocably changed by the world she'd been forced to join. But at least now it was her choice to stay. That had to count for something, even if she wasn't entirely sure what. Monday morning arrived with a stack of files 3 feet high, and a man Clara had never met standing in her new office. The office itself was impressive. Top floor of the shipping company's headquarters building, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, furniture that screamed executive authority. It should have felt like a promotion. Instead, it felt like walking onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except her. The man waiting for her was in his 50s, gray-haired and weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent decades working the docks before moving into management. He stood when Clara entered, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Rinaldi, he said, extending his hand. I'm James Chen. I've been interim operations manager since Mrs. Sophia's departure. Mr. Rinaldi asked me to help you transition into the role. Clara shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes assessed her without being obvious about it. Thank you, James. I appreciate the assistance. I imagine this situation has been difficult for everyone. Something flickered in James's expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief that she was acknowledging the chaos rather than pretending everything was normal. It's been an adjustment, he said carefully, but we're managing. Over the next 4 hours, James walked Clara through the operational structure of the Maritime Division. It was more complex than she'd anticipated, not just shipping routes and cargo manifests, but relationships with dock workers' unions, port authority agreements, customs protocols, and the delicate balance of legitimate business mixed with the family's less legal operations. The legitimate cargo pays the bills and keeps the authorities happy, James explained, pulling up shipping schedules on the computer. But approximately 30% of our volume is what we call priority shipments. Those require special handling and complete discretion. Priority shipments, Claire repeated, meaning smuggling. James didn't flinch at her directness. Meaning cargo that doesn't go through standard customs channels, yes. It's been part of the family business for 3 generations. Sophia's theft didn't affect those operations. She was smart enough to keep her hands off anything that would draw Mr. Rinaldi's immediate attention. She just stole from the legitimate side. Exactly. Small percentages across hundreds of transactions, hidden in invoice inflation and false documentation. It was clever, actually. If you hadn't been looking specifically for patterns, it could have gone unnoticed for years. Claire heard the respect in his voice and wondered if James had suspected what Sophia was doing but chosen not to look too closely. In this organization, willful ignorance was probably a survival skill. "What's our current status?" Clara asked, turning to the operational reports. "What problems am I inheriting besides the obvious trust issues?" James pulled up a different screen, and Clara's heart sank as she saw the list of complications. Delayed shipments, disputed invoices, port authorities asking uncomfortable questions about documentation discrepancies, and 3 major clients who were threatening to take their business elsewhere due to the recent chaos. "We need to rebuild credibility," James said. "Fast. Our competitors are already circling, trying to poach our clients by suggesting that the Rinaldi organization is falling apart from the inside." Clara spent the rest of the day buried in details, learning the systems Sophia had left in disarray and the relationships that needed immediate attention. By the time James finally left at 6 o'clock, Clara's head was pounding, and she'd filled 2 legal pads with notes. She was reviewing a particularly complicated customs filing when Dominic appeared in her doorway, still wearing his suit from whatever business he'd been handling. "How's your first day?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Overwhelming," Clara admitted. Sophia wasn't just stealing, she was also neglecting basic management. Half these files are incomplete, vendor relationships are deteriorating, and we have port inspectors asking questions about shipping documentation that doesn't match cargo manifests. "Can you fix it?" Clara looked up at him, seeing genuine interest in his expression. He wasn't testing her or setting her up to fail. He actually wanted to know if she could salvage the mess Sophia had left behind. "Yes," Clara said, surprised by her own certainty. "But it's going to take time and probably some uncomfortable conversations with people who have every reason not to trust us right now." "You have my full support," Dominic said. "Whatever resources you need, whoever you need to meet with, just ask. James knows the operational side, but you have authority over the strategic direction. Use it." He started to leave, then paused. "Clara, thank you for doing this. I know it's not what you signed up for." "I didn't really sign up for any of this," Clara pointed out. "But I'm here anyway, so I might as well do it right." Dominic's smile was small but genuine. "That's exactly the attitude that will make you successful. Good night, Mrs. Rinaldi." The next 3 weeks were a blur of 18-hour days, endless meetings, and the steep learning curve of managing a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate shipping company. Clara threw herself into the work with single-minded focus, partly because it needed to be done, and partly because staying busy kept her from thinking too hard about what she'd become. She rebuilt relationships with port authorities by being scrupulously honest about the legitimate cargo and impeccably discreet about the priority shipments. She reorganized the documentation systems to eliminate the gaps Sophia had left. She fired 2 managers who'd been complicit in the theft and promoted James Chen to Senior Operations Director, earning his fierce loyalty in the process. The work was exhausting, morally complicated, and oddly satisfying. Clara discovered she was good at this, at seeing the whole picture, at building systems that worked, at earning trust through competence and follow-through. People started coming to her with problems, confident she'd have solutions. The Maritime Division's reputation slowly began to recover, but success came with costs Clara hadn't anticipated. She started recognizing the signs of cargo that wasn't going through official channels. She learned which port inspectors could be trusted to look the other way and which ones required careful handling. She made decisions that directly facilitated illegal smuggling operations, all while maintaining the facade of legitimate business. She was becoming exactly what Dominic had predicted, an effective manager of criminal enterprise, someone who could compartmentalize the moral implications and focus on operational efficiency. The realization hit her one evening when she was reviewing shipping manifests and caught herself automatically flagging containers that would need to bypass standard customs inspection. She'd done it without thinking, without hesitation, without the moral struggle that should have accompanied facilitating smuggling. Clara set down her pen and stared at the documents, seeing her own handwriting marking which cargo was legitimate and which wasn't. When had this become normal? When had she stopped fighting against what she was doing and started optimizing it? A knock at her office door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. James Chen stood there with an unusual expression, something between concern and urgency. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "A big one." Clara gestured him in, pushing aside her existential crisis to deal with whatever operational disaster had emerged. "What happened?" "One of our priority shipments got flagged at customs. The inspector is new, doesn't understand how things work, and he's asking for full documentation and cargo inspection." Claire's blood ran cold. "Can we reroute the shipment?" "Not without drawing more attention. The container is already in the inspection queue." James ran a hand through his hair. "Mrs. Rinaldi, if they open that container and find what's actually inside, we're looking at federal charges. Not just fines or slap-on-the-wrist consequences, real prosecution." "What's in the container?" James lowered his voice even though they were alone. "Medical equipment. Very expensive, very regulated medical equipment that's supposed to require special import licenses and FDA approval." "Why don't we have those licenses?" "Because getting them takes months and costs a fortune in compliance fees. We've been bringing this equipment in for a private medical facility that serves very wealthy clients who don't want to wait for official approval." James met her eyes. "It's technically illegal, but it's not drugs or weapons. It's medical equipment that saves lives, just bypassing bureaucratic red tape." Clara processed this rapidly. The moral implications were murky. Illegal importation, yes, but for equipment that helped people. Still, if customs opened that container, the consequences would be severe for everyone involved. "Who's the inspector?" she asked. "David Morrison, young, idealistic, completely by the book." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. David Morrison. The same David Morrison who'd been engaged to Vanessa before the forced marriage had redirected Clara's life. The senator's son who represented everything clean and legitimate that Clara had left behind. "I know him," Clara said quietly. "Or I know of him. He was supposed to marry my stepsister." James's eyebrows rose. "Can you use that connection?" Clara thought about it, running through scenarios. She could contact David, try to leverage the almost family relationship, see if she could convince him to overlook the inspection. But David Morrison wasn't the type to ignore protocol for personal connections. And approaching him would only draw more attention to the shipment and potentially to her own role in the organization. "No," Clara said finally. "That would make things worse. We need a different approach." She pulled up the customs database, accessing the files through the Port Authority connections she'd carefully cultivated over the past weeks. David Morrison's inspection queue showed 3 containers scheduled for today, including the Rinaldi shipment. "What if the container wasn't where he expected it to be?" Clara said, an idea forming. "What if there was a clerical error that moved it to a different inspection queue, one handled by a more understanding inspector?" "You can do that?" "I have access to the scheduling system. It would look like a simple administrative mistake." Clara's hands moved across the keyboard, pulling up the necessary screens. "The container gets reassigned to Inspector Rodriguez. He's been cooperative in the past. David Morrison gets a different container to inspect, one with completely legitimate cargo. Everyone wins. Except David Morrison, who loses the chance to make a big bust on his second week. He'll have other opportunities to be a hero," Clara said, her voice harder than she intended. "And we avoid federal charges." She made the changes, watching the system update in real time. The Rinaldi container shifted to a different queue. David Morrison's inspection schedule now showed a different container. One Clara knew contained nothing but legally imported automotive parts. "Done," she said, logging out of the system. "The shipment will be inspected by Rodriguez tomorrow morning. He'll find everything in order and clear it for release." James looked at her with new respect. "You just saved the family from a major disaster." "I just committed computer fraud to facilitate smuggling," Clara corrected. "Let's not romanticize it." But even as she said it, Clara knew she'd crossed another line. She'd actively intervened to protect illegal operations, used her access and skills to circumvent law enforcement, and done it all without hesitation once she understood the stakes. When had this become who she was? James left, and Clara sat alone in her office, staring at the computer screen. She should feel guilty. She should be horrified at how easily she'd manipulated the system to protect criminal activity. Instead, she just felt tired and increasingly numb to the moral compromises her position required. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. Heard about the customs situation. Well done handling it. Of course he already knew. Dominic knew everything that happened in his organization, probably before Clara finished making it happen. She typed back a simple acknowledgement and returned to her work, pushing aside the uncomfortable questions about who she was becoming. The weeks turned into months. Clara's management of the maritime operations became increasingly successful, earning her respect from the family and fear from competitors. She attended family dinners where she was treated as an equal rather than an outsider. She made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in cargo. She became essential to the Rinaldi organization in ways that went far beyond her forced marriage. And through it all, her relationship with Dominic evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. They weren't lovers. Their marriage remained largely professional, but they'd become partners in a way that surprised them both. Dominic consulted her on business decisions. Clara challenged his strategies when she saw better options. They worked together with the kind of efficiency that came from mutual respect and complementary skills. 6 months after her forced marriage, Clara found herself standing in Dominic's office reviewing quarterly financial reports when he said something that stopped her mid-sentence. "I'm dissolving the marriage contract." Clara looked up from the spreadsheet, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "The original contract that forced you into this marriage. I'm having it legally dissolved." Dominic pulled out a document and slid it across his desk. "You'll remain my wife legally unless you choose to file for divorce, but the contract that gave me leverage over you and your family, that's gone. Your father's debts are cleared, your family has no further obligations, and you're free to leave if you want." Clara stared at the document, her mind racing. "Why?" "Because you've proven yourself 100 times over. You've rebuilt the maritime operations, prevented disasters, earned the family's trust. You've become essential to this organization, not because I'm forcing you to be here, but because you're genuinely good at what you do." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "You deserve the choice I never gave you initially. Stay because you want to, not because a contract compels you." Clara picked up the document, reading through the legal language that officially terminated all obligations from the original marriage contract. It was legitimate, comprehensive, and completely unexpected. "What if I choose to leave?" she asked. "Then you leave. I'll ensure you have enough money to start over wherever you want, a new identity if you need it, and protection from anyone who might see you as a liability." Dominic's voice was steady. "I won't hold you hostage, Clara. Not anymore." Clara set down the document, her emotions too tangled to sort through quickly. 6 months ago, this offer would have been everything she wanted: freedom, escape, the ability to reclaim her old life. But now she wasn't sure what her old life would even look like. She'd changed too much to go back to being invisible Clara, who fixed problems quietly and asked for nothing. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Take all the time you need." Dominic stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "But Clara, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I respect what you've accomplished here. You've exceeded every expectation I had when I forced you into this marriage. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't give you the choice from the beginning." He left her alone with the document, and Clara sat in his office for a long time, trying to imagine walking away from the life she'd built. The power, the purpose, the strange satisfaction of being good at something important, even if that something was morally compromised. Could she go back to her old life? Return to being nobody special, doing bookkeeping for legitimate businesses, living quietly on the margins? The thought made her feel claustrophobic, like trying to fit back into clothes she'd outgrown. But staying meant accepting who she'd become. Someone who managed criminal operations, who facilitated smuggling, who made decisions that skirted or crossed legal boundaries on a daily basis. It meant choosing this life deliberately rather than being forced into it. Clara walked back to her office and sat at her desk, looking out at the harbor where ships moved cargo both legal and illegal, where her decisions affected hundreds of lives, where she'd built something from the wreckage of Sophia's betrayal. She thought about Dominic's offer, about freedom and choice, about the person she'd been 6 months ago versus the person she'd become. Then she picked up her phone and sent a text to Dominic. "I'm staying, not because of the contract, but because this is where I choose to be." His response came almost immediately. "I was hoping you'd say that. Welcome to the family, partner." Partner. Not wife as obligation, not employee under duress, but partner by choice. Clara felt something unlock in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying since the forced marriage ceremony finally releasing. She'd made her choice, not the choice her old self would have made, maybe not even the choice she'd imagined 6 months ago, but it was her choice, made with full knowledge of what it meant and what it cost. That evening, Dominic hosted a small family dinner to announce Clara's official position as permanent director of maritime operations. Vittoria toasted her success. The cousins who'd been skeptical 6 months ago now treated her with genuine respect. Even Antonio, still grieving his wife and rebuilding his own position in the family, acknowledged Clara's competence with grudging admiration. After dinner, Dominic found Clara on the terrace overlooking the gardens, where she'd spent so many hours questioning her choices and mourning her lost innocence. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "You can still change your mind. The offer stands." "I'm sure," Clara said. "6 months ago, I would have run the moment you gave me the chance, but I'm not that person anymore." "Who are you now?" Clara considered the question carefully. "Someone who understands that morality isn't black and white. Someone who's learned to wield power and accept the responsibilities that come with it. Someone who chooses to stay in a complicated situation because leaving would feel like giving up on the person I've become. Even though that person facilitates criminal operations? Even though," Clara confirmed. "I'm not proud of everything I do, but I'm proud of what I've built, how I've helped stabilize the organization, the relationships I've repaired. That has to count for something." Dominic was quiet for a moment, then said, "I didn't expect to respect you as much as I do. When I engineered that marriage contract, I thought I was acquiring an analyst, someone smart enough to find patterns, but controllable enough to manage. Instead, I got a partner who challenges me, who sees angles I miss, who's made me reconsider how I approach the business. Is that a compliment or a complaint?" "Both, probably." Dominic's smile was genuine. "You've made me better at what I do, Clara. More strategic, less reactive. That's worth more than I can easily quantify." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the gardens in shades of gold and amber. Clara thought about all the choices that had led to this moment: her father's debts, Vanessa's selfishness, the forced marriage, the investigation, the decision to take the maritime position, and finally the choice to stay when freedom was offered. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Forcing me into this marriage instead of just hiring me legitimately?" Dominic considered carefully. "I regret the method. I could have approached you differently, offered you a real choice from the beginning, but I don't regret the outcome. We work well together, and I don't think we would have arrived at this partnership through conventional hiring. Because I never would have agreed to work for a criminal organization if you'd asked nicely." "Exactly." Dominic turned to face her. "But now that you're here by choice, now that you understand what we do and why, you're more valuable than any employee I could have hired. You believe in what you're doing, not because you're naive about the moral implications, but because you've weighed them and decided the work matters anyway." Clara wasn't sure she'd go that far. She wasn't certain she believed in what they did, but she believed in her own capabilities, in the systems she'd built, in her ability to manage complex operations and solve problems that would break other people. Maybe that was enough. Maybe belief in yourself and your skills was more sustainable than belief in the righteousness of your cause, especially when your cause involves smuggling and organized crime. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Clara, we just keep doing what we're doing? Running businesses, managing operations, pretending we're a normal married couple?" "We could try actually being a married couple," Dominic suggested, and Clara heard something uncertain in his voice that she'd never heard before. "Not just partners in business, but partners in life. See if this arrangement could become something more than strategic." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the ruthless mob boss to the man underneath, intelligent, driven, lonely in ways he'd never admit, and slowly learning to trust someone outside his immediate family circle. "I don't love you," Clara said honestly. "I respect you. I trust you professionally, but I don't love you." "I don't love you either," Dominic replied. "But I value you, I enjoy your company, and I think we could build something genuine if we both wanted to try." It was the least romantic proposal for a real relationship Clara had ever heard. It was also the most honest. They weren't kids with stars in their eyes. They were adults who'd been forced together by circumstances and discovered they worked well as a team. Building on that foundation might never produce passionate love, but it could produce partnership, companionship, and mutual respect. Okay, Clara said, let's try. Dominic's smile was slow and genuine. Just like that? Just like that. We've already committed to the business partnership and the legal marriage. Might as well see if we can make the personal part work too. He took her hand, and Clara felt the warmth of his skin against hers. It wasn't electric or overwhelming, but it was real and grounding in a way she hadn't expected. They went back inside together, and for the first time since the forced marriage ceremony, Clara didn't feel like a prisoner in Dominic's house. She felt like someone who'd found her place in a complicated world, who'd discovered capabilities she never knew she had, who'd made peace with moral compromises in exchange for power and purpose. The next morning, Clara woke in her own rooms. Dominic hadn't pushed for immediate intimacy, understanding that building a real relationship would take time. She got ready for work with the same efficiency she'd developed over 6 months, but something felt different, lighter somehow, now that she was staying by choice rather than compulsion. At the office, James greeted her with news that their largest client had just renewed their contract for another 3 years, citing Clara's management as the deciding factor. The Port Authority inspector, who'd been asking uncomfortable questions, had been transferred to a different district, and 3 new clients were requesting meetings to discuss potential shipping partnerships. The Maritime Division was thriving under Clara's leadership. The family business was more stable than it had been in years. And Clara herself had transformed from invisible daughter to essential partner in one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast. She should probably feel conflicted about that success. Instead, she just felt satisfied. Over the following months, Clara and Dominic's relationship evolved from professional partnership into something more personal. They started having dinner together most evenings, sharing details about their days, and gradually learning each other's histories and preferences. They discovered shared interests in strategy games and classic films. They developed the kind of comfortable rapport that came from working closely and respecting each other's competencies. It wasn't passionate love, but it was real affection built on solid foundations of trust and mutual respect. Clara found herself looking forward to Dominic's company, valuing his insights, and genuinely enjoying the life they were building together. A year after the forced marriage that had brought them together, Dominic took Clara to the same library where they'd had their wedding ceremony. But this time, there was no coercion, no contracts, no threats. "I want to renew our vows," Dominic said, holding both her hands. "Not because a contract requires it, but because I choose you. Because you've become the most important person in my life, and I want to acknowledge that properly." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, surprised by the emotion. "You're getting sentimental in your old age." "I'm getting honest," Dominic corrected. "I forced you into this marriage for strategic reasons, but I'm asking you now, freely, to choose to stay married to me not for business or protection, but because we've built something worth keeping." "Yes," Clara said simply. "I choose to stay. I choose you. I choose this life we've built together, complicated and morally messy as it is." They renewed their vows that evening with just Vittoria and James as witnesses, a small, intimate ceremony that meant infinitely more than the forced wedding a year earlier. When Dominic kissed her this time, Clara kissed him back, and it felt like beginning something new rather than fulfilling an obligation. Clara Rinaldi, no longer Hale, no longer forced, but Rinaldi by choice, had found her place in a world she never intended to join. She'd discovered capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. She'd made peace with moral compromises in exchange for power and purpose, and she'd built a partnership with a man who'd started as her captor and become her equal. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It wasn't the life anyone would have chosen for her. But standing in Dominic's arms, running a successful operation, respected by the family and valued for her skills, Clara realized it was the life she'd chosen for herself. And that choice, made with full knowledge and complete freedom, transformed everything. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't invisible or disposable. She was Clara Rinaldi, strategic partner to one of the most powerful men in the city, essential architect of the family's success, and someone who'd learned to thrive in darkness by becoming her own source of light. The forced bride had become a willing partner. The invisible daughter had become indispensable. And the woman who'd started this journey trapped and powerless had emerged with more power than she'd ever imagined, power she'd chosen to embrace rather than flee from. Clara's story didn't end with rescue or escape. It ended with acceptance, transformation, and the complicated triumph of finding strength in unexpected places and building a future from the wreckage of a forced beginning. She'd survived by adapting, she'd thrived by choosing to stay, and she'd discovered that sometimes the prison you're forced into can become the kingdom you choose to rule, if you're willing to accept the crown and all the darkness that comes with it. Clara accepted it all, and in doing so, she became exactly who she was always meant to be: powerful, essential, and finally, truly free.